film starts with a haunting, atmospheric choir piece composed by Tom Holkenborg, the man responsible for the dramatic and iconic score in Mad Max Fury Road, a personal favorite of mine. This piece opens the film on a foreboding tone, a feeling that this film picks up in the aftermath of a Shakespearean tragedy. As the choir starts to subside and the universe of stars comes into focus, the opening narration plays. A soft-spoken, elderly man's voice gives us a brief introduction to the world. The known universe is ruled by a single planet. A dynasty 1,000 kings old held absolute dominion as they stripped their own world bare and expanded across the stars, encountering alien civilizations and bringing them to heel, colonizing worlds and cementing their power. This age of glory was brought to an end by an assassin that killed the royal family and ended the bloodline. In the political unrest that followed, many conquered planets on the edge of their territory began to consider the fight for independence, and a senator on the homeworld uses the unrest to seize ultimate power and name himself regent. The newly established regent sends a commander to the border worlds as a show of force and to stomp out any signs of disloyalty. As the narration plays, a smooth, shimmering hull is pulled open in space, and what we later learn is the brutal commander's dreadnought moves through it. We get a sense of scale as the camera pans to reveal hangar bays on the sides with ships disembarking into space. When the dreadnought fully passes, we get a title drop, a classic style reminiscent of the genre of retro sci-fi and action films. A promise of older but cherished ideas presented in the high quality of modern cinema. The camera pans down to show a simple farm, an alien creature that very closely resembles a horse pulling a plow to till the field, with our main protagonist directing it. This resembles low fantasy, or low sci-fi if you will. A sci-fi setting with sci-fi elements but otherwise resembles our modern or even past world. This is an effective way to ground the characters in something familiar, something we can recognize, or even something we can relate to. The opening of Star Wars does this with Luke. The opening scene of A New Hope gives us spaceship battles, droids, and stormtroopers with laser carbines. We get a come down with just the droids in a desert, then we see Luke at home. There are sci-fi elements woven in, but the home itself was natural materials. His aunt was wearing a denim jacket. Luke was a farm boy. He had good mechanical knowledge, but in the same way a farm boy in the 70s would know tractor repair. This grounds Luke's character to the familiar, makes it much easier for the audience to relate and engage with the story, front-loading the high sci-fi aspects just to pull it back to a simple life and blends the sci-fi elements with our more relatable character. Rebel Moon's low sci-fi goes farther back, hearkening to a medieval era of hand tools and grit, peasantry and physical labor. It draws on the knowledge and perception the audience has of the medieval era to portray a hard-working and simple life. Difficult, but rewarding. Since the opening displayed a spacefaring dreadnought, these farmers achieve near instant underdog status, informs the viewer that while we're going to see how these simple folk live in their low sci-fi setting, high sci-fi exists in this world and will come to meet it. The existence of this disparity alone acts as a form of foreshadowing and tension. As the viewer is shown how these people live their day-to-day lives, that shadow of the inevitable clash of the high and low sci-fi looms over. Our protagonist, Cora, hits a large stone when tilling the land and has to stop to dig it out with her hands. Once removed, she takes the time to sift the dirt and smell the fresh soil, content with the simple life she's living, happy with the physical labor and connection to the natural world. The first of our side characters, Gunnar, makes his introduction. He appears smitten with Cora, but when he speaks is nervous, unconfident. He portrays a quiet intelligence, meek and understanding. Gunnar is an overseer of the farm, removed from the physical labor it takes to sow, nurture, and harvest the fields. He instead deals with the numbers, the logistics, how much to store, who to sell to, for how much, meeting and negotiating with potential buyers. We move on. The village is portrayed as a simple but thriving community. Wood and stone houses built on a hillside. Natural construction in the old European style, but with modern amenities like electric lighting and automatic sliding doors. A communal building referred to as the Longhouse hosts a celebratory feast. The leader of this village, or father as he's called, is a man named Sindri. He gives a speech about tribute that the farmers must pay for the gods to bless their fields. This is a minor fake-out, as some viewers' perception and assumptions of this medieval-style village will be waiting for the shoe to drop and expected tribute to mean some sort of barbaric sacrifice. This fake-out lasts only moments as Sindri's speech continues and is made explicitly clear that the tribute is sex, consensual, with whomever the individual chooses to partner with. This is not a cult scenario, where the father demands excessive sacrifice or sexual favors, but it shows, while at the moment lighthearted, a superstitious and religious peoples. Cora shares a home with an older man that takes a fatherly or sponsorship role, giving advice and helping her to integrate into the community. Cora returns from a fling she had with a village hunter, and the old man starts up a conversation. He encourages her to marry, to make things permanent, to truly become a member of the community for good. Cora isn't ready and alludes to more of her history. She calls herself a child of war. She says the idea of love and family was beaten out of her, that love is a weakness. Cora came to this farm to escape her life, to find something new. The next morning they are back in the fields, seeding the land, cheery and not at all hungover. The dreadnought arrives over their planet. While most stare in awe, Cora panics. She recognizes what that ship means, what it can do. Everything she's built for herself in this village is at risk. She runs for the alarm. The village, and I mean the whole village, gathers in the Longhouse to discuss what to do when the dreadnought's shuttles arrive. Up until this point, we saw the village in the good times, when things were ideal. Now that things are stressful, we can see who they really are. There's some division. Gunnar and Sindri get into a debate, but the whole village is present when they openly discuss their prior business with rebels. Information that if it got out could get the entire village killed. This is the level of trust the villagers have, the strength of their community. Gunnar sees this as an opportunity, Sindri a threat. The trade network they currently use is difficult to turn profit. This new force is dangerous, true, but they have access to a lot more funds and can act as a powerful client that can provide them protection if they would need it. A mutually beneficial relationship. The snag is that Gunnar has sold to dangerous people before. Selling to both sides of a conflict is high risk, high reward. Cora breaks the stalemate. They will politely comply, but volunteer nothing. The shuttles arrive screaming engines and blasting air, sending dirt and dust into the crowd of waiting villagers. 2 officers, 3 priests, and a squad of soldiers present themselves. The officers lead the way, prim, proper, in stark contrast to the plain-dressed villagers. The 3 priests are dressed in flowing red holy robes and ornate masks, keeping behind the officers and saying nothing, just monitoring to officiate the meeting. Behind them is a squad of soldiers, both protection and intimidation. They carry a banner and wear combat armor with obvious battle damage. This is a meeting of the high and low sci-fi. This small farming community is completely outclassed in technology, tactics, firepower, and diplomacy. The lead officer introduces himself as Admiral Noble, serving the slain king, and embraces Sindri in a hug. The culture difference between the low and high sci-fi groups was already going to make this meeting awkward. The buildup of a terrifying and violent people instead acting polite and warmly only adds to this unease. They make their way to the Longhouse. Noble comments that the village appears well fed, then reveals the reason they are there. Noble is hunting down rebels, and he wants Sindri, and in turn the village, to help. This is twofold. As an independent farm, these people would be selling a vital product to just about anyone. Without paperwork, without proper tracking, criminals and revolutionaries that want to avoid more controlled, more monitored spaces would seek out independent farms like this. Noble can use these people as a sort of spy network. On the other hand, as an isolated village with trade connections, it's possible that rebels are already embedded. Noble has to walk a fine line between investigating them and recruiting them. Sindri declines by saying they are far removed from politics. This is a gentle rejection. Sindri wants nothing to do with this powerful force. He's hoping they can come off as too small and unimportant that Noble will just leave them alone. Noble is not convinced. Sindri avoiding the point, that comes off as suspicious. He turns the conversation and proposes a partnership. More of a sale, really. Noble will purchase their excess grain. They could always use some extra food, but the more relevant point is that this purchase would give them more time to investigate and possibly enlist the help of the town. Sindri again politely declines, explaining that they have no surplus to sell. Noble found a weak point and walks in. Sindri will scramble for another excuse while trying to maintain composure. Noble will ignore it and bring up another inconsistency, all with a smile locked in. Noble gets tired of this game and switches targets. Gunnar cracks under questioning, trying to force the deal he wanted, but undermining Sindri in the process. He tries to save the situation by saying Sindri was just being conservative in his estimates, but their answers are contradictory. Noble has had enough. He decides to solve this dispute for them. He takes a hold of a ceremonial club, steps up to Gunnar, and with the begs and pleas of the village around him, turns and strikes down Sindri. Okay, let's do this. Noble could tell this was a close-knit community based on how the whole village joined them in the Longhouse. They called Sindri father, for heaven's sake. When taking control of a town or city, some forces will choose to kill the leader and install a puppet. But there's no puppet ready to take his place, and killing a beloved leader will implant resentment in the people. This creates rebels. It was a fake-out, but killing Gunnar would have done the same thing, but the angry villagers would be under an established leader. Why the fuck would Sindri tell them they have no excess? This is a really dumb lie. Just looking at them is enough to figure that out, which is exactly what Noble did. Noble. Admiral Noble. Turns out he's not so noble. How creative. Why is an admiral here anyway? Are you telling me a galactic military is so incompetent that they'll send a full-bird admiral into a village they suspect are hiding terrorists? This force has been conquering for 1,000 generations, but here on Earth we figured that shit out real quick. To continue the trend, the Admiral has no qualms with the entire village following them into the Longhouse for talks. Doesn't even politely ask them for a more private conversation. They just let any potential terrorist mingle in and get between the Admiral and his guard. Not only does this make the military incompetent, but if the rebels can't off this dummy, then they're incompetent too. The guardsmen, or soldiers, armor, I like for some reason. But these burn marks, is this telling us the armor can actually stop incoming rounds? If so, we better see that happen later in the film. And Bob here is a fool for using Batman pouches instead of protecting half his torso. Or are these proofing marks, using underpowered rounds to leave superficial damage before sending the armor to the troops to ease their fears? If so, why does veteran Bob have it, but not their new guy? Wouldn't the rookie actually get something out of it? If those marks were made by shrapnel or something, their unprotected faces would be all scarred up, so I'm outright rejecting that theory. While we're on this frame, look at that guy in the back. You see those goggles? Curious about them? I am, but the camera blur decided we don't deserve to know. You can call it an artistic choice, but in so much of this movie, the blur hides things from us. I like looking at backgrounds, at minor characters, at the architecture and the world. It helps me get engrossed in a film and reveals the world building and how these people live. Why would you throw that away? Rookie gives Village Girl a sympathetic look until Bob pushes him and makes a meanie face. Commissar-clothed Admiral Noble gives an uncomfortably long hug and speaks all corporate nice. Nothing wrong with the concept, but this is two-dimensional, predictable, and lazy. It's almost comedic, and I'm sure that was not the intention. The trio of shuttles approach at high speed, low to the ground. Very good. You're investigating the outer worlds for rebels. Flying defensively to survive a possible ambush from rebel AA guns is a good plan. But it turns out the lead shuttle, the most exposed, is the one carrying the Admiral. Dumb. Credit where it's due. I really like the shuttle design. The biggest inspirations appear to be the Osprey and Chinook helicopters. The Osprey is rather infamous for mechanical failures leading to dead Marines, but for a dropship to be able to do vertical takeoff, the two tilt-rotor tilt-engine design is perfectly fitting, and I'm surprised I don't see this more often. The rear loses the tail of the Osprey to more closely resemble the iconic Chinook. A single door means more structural integrity and consistent side armor. The loss of control surfaces on the tail means your top speed is reduced due to stability issues, but you present a smaller target and leave room for a rear gun. These dropships have an interesting feature. They have guns on the front and rear, and one big one on top. I'm assuming this is some form of light artillery. It can only be fired when the shuttle is landed due to the recoil. These dropships are utilitarian little pillboxes that can do well in any environment the Empire fights in. They are cool looking, unique, as far as I know, and fit well into this world. While we're complimenting, let's at least mention the visual effects. According to a befores and afters interview with visual effects supervisor Marcus T., there was a big push for supplementing the real and digital, with both Snyder asking for and accepting recommendations from the crew to try on-set practicals so they would look more natural as a final product. Things like throwing dust at the lens, water droplets, or, in the case of the shuttle landing scene, flying a helicopter low to get a shot of the dust kicked up from the rotor wash. It looks pretty neat. Big pretty waterfall. Really big. On a tiny mountain. The source of water for their farm, and since I don't see any solar panels, I assume their power source for their lights too. Shame it'll be dry in a week at that rate. During the argument, Gunner seems to be close to convincing Sindri when Cora butts in and shuts Gunner down. Now their plan is to just openly lie? Cora even states that they have to hope the soldiers don't dig too deep. They knew this plan was flimsy. Why did they do it? If you aren't going to work with them, you could say you already sold your surplus, which is true, by the way. Just don't be specific about who you sold it to. I like that Cora has a sponsor, an old man that houses her and helps her to integrate, and I like that Cora has a backstory. But why the fuck does she drop this exposition on him? Oh, child of war, you've lived with him for 2 seasons. He already knows all this. Cora's rambling backstory is for us, the audience. This is a lazy way to reveal backstory that is very common in this film. Whore. I understand that this scene was intended to be lighthearted and comedic, but I did not appreciate a bearded man bellowing thrusting of hips and sounds of pleasure at me. That's behavior I'm accustomed to hearing from our local vagabonds, not a respected village elder. And when the sponsor asked, "It's impressive, which one, the animal?" Then I fucks Porter's boy toy for the length of a Top Gun volleyball scene. Or the hunter. I cringed out of my chair. Stop. Please. Gunner. I like this actor in Hill House. A lot. Everybody go watch Hill House. So I don't know if he was told to do this, or if I only noticed it here because Hill House distracted me with good writing. But I swear, the Huseman face is one of 3 expressions he used in this film. Cora has been here for 2 seasons, doing hard labor, eating dem grains, and is still built like a bulimic and struggles to push rocks. If the royal family ruled for 1,000 generations, how the hell did the death of 3 of them end the bloodline? Wouldn't there be a spiderweb of relatives like we have in real life, with a line of succession under close watch? How did an assassin shank the king, queen, and princess? After a few millennia of rule, you'd think security would be able to drop an assassin at least before they earned their UAV. Alright, we're caught up. 21 minutes into the movie, good and the bad. If you couldn't tell, I was honestly enjoying this movie. All the flaws, all the annoyances, I was on board. Learning about the world, the characters, enjoying the music and the visuals. But Noble clubbing Sindri like a big-eyed seal was the straw that clubbed the camel's back. I wasn't lying or acting when I was complimenting it, so if you're here to listen to me tear this movie apart, grab yourself a drink. If you're desperately searching for a defense of this film, I'm gonna continue to praise what I can, but it only gets worse from here. After publicly clubbing Sindri, his wife wails and runs towards her dearly departed just for a trooper to pull a lightsaber and cut her down. First off, amateur hour. Crowd control apparently means gutting a greeting widow when outnumbered 3-1 in a confined space, which could have been entirely avoided if Noble had the 4 brain cells needed to make the meeting private. Not only did they kill beloved father, they also opened up his crying wife. Do you want rebels? Because that's how you make rebels. Second, so these lightsabers are common enough for just any random soldier to have them? For those who don't know, this story was originally offered to, and rejected by, Disney. I imagine that stormtroopers with lightsabers would have not gone over so well. But since this is its own IP, I suppose a super overpowered sword plentiful enough to be an enlisted man's kit isn't such a big deal. Modern soldiers have C4 after all, and it serves a similar purpose. Gunner doesn't respond well to the change of leadership, but I don't care about that right now. Look at that gun. That looks like the rifle the other soldiers were carrying, but with no stock or sights. Whoever did this shouldn't be allowed near power tools. And what about this joker? Instead of super rad welding goggles, he's got a helmet-mounted visor that completely blinds him aside from a few tiny slits. Fool. Okay, back to Gunner and Noble. With Sindri dead, Noble no longer cares about playing nice. Once the harvest is complete, he will return and take most of the grain, leaving the village to starve with the scraps. So Noble is full cat-kicking, mustache-twirling evil. In a galactic empire, they would have massive food production. A farming community that does all the work by hand is the equivalent of a hippie organic food market. Not something the military would care too much about. Only useful if you're trying to stay under the radar, like, let's say, a rebel, or you want your grain free range, I guess. The point is, a pure evil villain doesn't make sense in this context since it would create more problems for the Empire and look bad on his performance review. And pure evil characters that don't make sense to the world are very annoying. The shuttles take off, leaving 13 troopers behind to ensure the villagers do as they're told. Need I remind you, the villagers were told to work, starve, and die by the same club stroker that publicly brutalized their beloved father and sliced his wife. These 13 men have a very difficult task of not pushing them over the edge and getting pitchforked in the night. So what's the first thing these soldiers do in this powder keg of a situation? Evict and occupy a building. Wonderful. These are soldiers, aren't they? Don't they have tents? Moving right along, Rookie opens a crate and a sick-ass robot jack-in-the-box out of it. Robots are cool. Rookie walks the circle in a resting position. Can confirm, very comfy. The robot speaks. It is a unit of the Mechanicus Militarum. I hate this. This movie is inspired by 40K. Any stronger claims are up to Game Workshop legal team. Now, I'm just a casual 40K guy, which is to say I like binging lore videos, so here's the relevant parts. In 40K, the Mechanicus is a machine cult. They worship technology but do not fully understand it. AI is heresy of the highest degree. The militarum is the army, the mudfeet, the guardsmen, destined to die in the endless meat grinder of war to protect cities of billions that will never know their sacrifice. A full mechanical, talking robot represents 40K on an aesthetic level only. Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, but it also invites comparison. And while 40K has shelves of lore, Rebel Moon stands alone, and its surface-deep nature does not hold up in comparison. The robot is characterized as a middle ground of pure programming and free will. It makes a mistake in its introduction. Defender of the king. Correction, of the slain king. Robots in media can be portrayed in a lot of different ways, but to make it simple, I came up with a scale, with pure programming on one end, exampled by Betamax, HAL, and the Omnidroids, and with free will on the other end, fully human, with the likes of Wall-E, Iron Giant, and Transformers. When Rookie asks a robot to move boxes, he responds that it falls perfectly into his protocols. So this robot falls somewhere in the middle. It's not controlled by strict protocols as indicated by the introduction slip, but it still has protocols to follow, so it belongs here in the middle with Bender and the Star Wars droids. I made the scale pure programming and free will instead of sentience, because sentience is a little goofy. It's a measure of the ability to feel emotions, not what you're restricted to. While Robot is shown to have emotions, his limitations are based off programming. If it's hard set or implanted on personality, well, we don't know, but that's really interesting to me. Meet Bill. After screaming at villagers to evict a building, he feels parched, so he calls Village Girl over and drinks water aggressively. Don't be like Bill. Bob makes an effort to be reserved and polite, waiting until Bill screams her away to say, and I quote, "That's how I like them. Young, strong enough to put up a fight." End quote. Don't be like Bob. Bill sees the robot and has a little howl about it, before he explains to Bob, his boss, that the king's fighting robots won't fight anymore since the king died. They all just dropped their weapons that day. This information was meant for us as viewers, but the way they gave us this information also tells us that Bob, the leader of the squad, had no idea that their killbots don't kill anymore. So not only is Bob a grapist and bad at his job, he doesn't read company emails. Worthless. Bill decides it would be fun to prove the Slain King's killbot won't kill by shooting it. By itself, that's diesel huffing behavior. I don't go around shooting forklifts as a safety check. But he shoots Robot while Rookie is stacking boxes into its arms. Bill follows up this near-friendly fire incident with his gun with no sights by screaming at our robot and shooting it 2 more times. He's only stopped by Rookie's intervention. Bill, experiencing the aggression and ego of a methed up Walmart manager, presses his gun under Rookie's chin and tells him no one would care if he pulled the trigger. Bob finally tells Bill to chill, but since Bill is peak power tripping, he continues to yell at Rookie until Bob physically removes the gun from Rookie's chin. Rookie peacocks in that uniquely annoying way reserved for overconfident and underweight young men. Bob resists the urge to smack him and instead just gets everyone to resume working and sends the robot to clean itself. After washing his face, the robot has a little sit to enjoy the view and avoid working. Relatable, but what the fuck? Robot thought it was necessary to confirm moving boxes was within his programming, but when ordered to clean himself, sits on a rock and ponders? Village Girl joins his dilly-dallying, and Robot asks if she's ever heard the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Princess, then gooms more backstory all over the place. Before her birth, the killbots pledged themselves to her. If that's literal or not, doesn't really matter, because it shows these bots have programmed loyalty to the royal family. I theorize, but cannot confirm, that they belong in the same order as the priests, separate in command to the military, but on a small scale will be tasked to support military units. Robot speaks in reverence during his monologue of the princess despite never seeing her, calling her Puri Salvatoris, a Latin phrase for child savior. The use of Latin here helps reinforce religious aspects of the civilization and carries shadows of a theocracy. Robit describes feeling warmth and hope when receiving word of her birth, reinforcing its sentience. Robit also reveals more details of the assassination. The family was taken out during the daughter's coronation. A coronation being a ceremony where the royalty are crowned. Since the child wasn't taking control of the empire, this coronation was one of heir apparent, an ancient Roman Empire tradition of crowning the next in line as a symbolic gesture. Assassinating all three royals at a coronation with a knife is very dramatic and very, very stupid. Possibly the most protected the royal family will ever be, and a dude with a blade was able to take out all three without getting stopped. Robit makes a connection between Village Girl and the late princess. Because her gentle nature resembles a character of the princess, it is built in its mind. At the end of the monologue, Village Girl says some nice words, places a flower crown on Robit, and places her hand on its cheek. Its cheek glows. What? This is a holy killbot. It possesses sentience and a humanoid form, but in no way is a blush feature justified. This is comedic, not touching. We next cut to the village arguing in the longhouse. They are mourning the death of Sindri and scared of what comes next. The soldiers have evicted the granary already, and in 10 weeks the ships will return to take their harvest. Some blame Gunner. Korra's boy toy suggests doing as they say and begging for mercy. They convince themselves that the battleship needs them, that if they prove themselves reliable, Noble will have a change of heart and leave them with enough food to survive. I understand that they're panicky and not thinking straight. But Jiminy Cricket, this is dumb. They killed your village elder for no reason. The battleship would house far more people than are in this village. The food they can provide is insignificant, and this whole "they'll see how useful we can be" means nothing since the force is here to put down rebels and go home. If you want to argue that real-world rebel put-downs are often extended, those forces also cycle in and out, and they bring their own supplies. These people are delusional. Korra packs her bags and proves herself to be the most rational person in the village. Her sponsor comes in to try and stop her, calling her a coward, saying he looked past the fear of consequences that may come by saving her from the crashed shuttle, that she could go find the real rebels and get them to help the village fight. Korra is having none of it. She declares that the village is already dead. Everyone in the longhouse is delusional. She won't bring the rebels to help, because that will bring hope. If they have hope, they will fight. And if they fight, they will die. Korra is right. Running is their only choice. If they comply, they starve. If they fight, they die. Even if through some miracle they survive the first attack, the Mother World will return in force. They are an empire. That's what they do. So the village either runs now, or hopes for a miracle so they can run later. Korra isn't waiting for them to figure that out. Korra starts loading up a horse thing within earshot of the granary, so she is there to hear the screaming. Well, that's a small village, so everybody can hear it, but Village Girl was out getting water before the soldiers called her over and grabbed her, dragged kicking and screaming into the granary. Rookie runs in to stop them, to no one's surprise, and Bill tries to Macho Man intimidate him, also to no one's surprise. Rookie sucker punches Bill and proceeds to get beat down and restrained by the group of men. Bill puts his thumb in Rookie's mouth. That little detail did surprise me. Bill then explains he's going to tie Rookie to a pole for a few days so he can watch. Alright, just Bill being Bill. Bob, though, actually disagrees with Bill. Wow, amazing. Did Bob have a change of heart? Nope. He just wants to cuck Bill by calling first dibs. Classic Bob. Cora arrives on scene and tells them to stop. She is clearly emotionally distressed by this. She was reluctant to intervene, but could not ignore the screams. She brought a hatchet. The Grape Squad is not impressed, and Bob, the dirty old man, is excited and tells his minions to grab her too. Nameless Goon number 37 approaches Cora with one hand on his rifle and one hand outstretched, gesturing for the hatchet, looking like an absolute doofus. Okay, these guns have recoil. Nameless Goon better have a good dental plan. Cora hesitantly hands Clown Boy the hatchet before changing her mind, knocking the rifle out of her face, which never should have been there in the first place, and the fight begins. Cora swings and pulls a hatchet from his hand, boops him in the neck, then does a fancy but time-wasting spin. No blood, by the way. Dragging a girl screaming while discussing grape etiquette is a-okay, though. Then there's this guy. Instead of just shooting her, he does his best impression of a T-posing balloon man. At this point in the story, we know none of these guys could have passed the ASVAB, but Frank here would have died crossing the street years ago. After wounding 2 men on the ground, Cora is completely exposed. It cuts to Rookie getting pulled back, then Bob turning Village Girl into a shield and pulling a gun on Cora. So, Cora's dead now, right? Wrong. As the scene continues, we see Bob in the back moving to grab Farm Girl. That means these scenes are out of order. I get why they did this. All of Cora's fight will be shown, but they want to give focus on some other parts of the scene. But unfortunately, they chose to do this at a pretty critical moment. Doesn't much matter though, because this means Bob was just standing there while Cora killed 2 of his guys and he did nothing. So Cora's got a gun now. Jim fights her for it, including clocking her in the face. Well done, Jim. But follows that up with a super weak grip. Jim, if you grabbed it like a normal person, you'd be alive right now. Cora wins the tugging match because Jim holds things weird. Then he just stands there flabbergasted and lets himself get hit in the face. Frank gets shot. I get it, a hatchet to the leg sucks, but Frank had a gun the whole time. If he had used it at any point, he would still be alive. The hair does a much better job because unlike Jim, he can actually hold things like a person. Really uses his head, but gets defeated by tactical sand. Okay, honestly, his reaction is a little exaggerated, but I like this. Hare fights like a real threat, and Cora has to use her environment to buy some breathing room, and then takes advantage of it. Okay, technically I just lied. He doesn't actually hold the gun. But the intent is clear, and it's not a problem with the characters making dumb decisions or anything like that, just a momentary actor mistake. The scene goes on like it didn't happen. It wasn't done intentionally to facilitate the good guys winning or anything like that. It's just an inconsequential goof. A nitpick. Now here comes Randy, charging the girl with a knife while shooting the ground. F for effort. We get a fraction of a second of Josh with a 10mm charging into a brawl. Dumb. Josh gets a shaving injury for his trouble and an elbow boo-boo. No blood, so it's not entirely clear, and I think Josh is done here. I want to point out that these soldiers have pistols. So why do Bob and Bill have no stock rifles? They have full-length rifles, cut rifles with no front sight, and pistols with no rear sight. Now, we make jokes about Kel-Tec engineers, but at least their horrors are designed to actually work. Rebel Moon armorers actively worsen the base product, and the soldiers that use them are no better. Cora now has Josh's pistol and somehow blocks 2 overhead attacks. Lenny gets blasted, and Pete does nothing with his left hand. Doesn't reach for the gun, doesn't grab her, doesn't do anything until Cora turns to face him. For the crime of dumb, Pete is sentenced to death in slow-mo. Cora doesn't just shoot Mark, she instead stabs his foot. Mark, unlike Frank, pushes through the pain and does a 2-handed swing at Cora. Now, Mark is fucking ripped, but somehow, with both hands, elevation, and muscle advantage, Cora overpowers him with her left arm. For Mark's insolence, he was betrayed by the laws of physics and shot in the head. Ron takes his pistol off Rookie to shoot a now totally exposed Cora, and Rookie fights him for the gun. That part's good, but Ron has the same problem as our dearly departed Pete with a non-functional left arm if the scene calls for it. Because he tries to fight Rookie one-handed, but doesn't have the reality-bending powers of Cora, Ron gets shot in the chest. Rip Bozo. Cora is completely exposed in the middle of the granary. Bob has an open shot, and Bill returned with his cut rifle. Cora survives this, of course. Bob doesn't shoot at all, and Bill shoots one-handed while screaming. Yep. Cora shoots his gun, disabling it, but instead of killing him with a quick follow-up, she charges and jumps on him. This must have broken Bill's less molten brain, because instead of reacting to the gun push against his neck, Bill's hands are busy holding Cora up. For the crime of horny, Bill gets put down. He died how he lived. Now it's Cora and Rookie versus Bob and his meat shield in a classic standoff. This is effectively the end of the fight and a continuation of the main narrative. Snyder wanted this fight scene to feel raw, a reluctant protagonist deciding to act in the moment when things have gone too far to ignore. A dangerous and war-weary individual reawakening in combat. There's no music. This magnifies the sounds of gunfire and physical hits. This supports the raw feel and tone they were trying to achieve. All the action was close, physical, hand-to-hand, and bladed weapons made a majority of the fight. This idea could have worked, but the execution betrayed it. The slow-mo in this fight becomes excessive. When you want raw but contradict it with altered time, it hurts the tone. The biggest problem with this fight, though, is the stakes. Every fight, with a possible exception of comedy, is built on stakes, on the idea that there's something at risk of losing. To have stakes, you need a believable threat. In this case, that means the baddies act like competent soldiers, and actions have believable consequences. Throughout the fight, we saw soldiers with guns get close to the threat instead of staying at range. People opening themselves up to get hit. No signs of physical injury after getting hit by blades. Soldiers not shooting when their target is exposed. Grown men getting overpowered by a very thin woman, and terrible aim. We're shown that the soldiers aren't a real threat. They are too dumb, and reality will betray them if they aren't. This kills the stakes, and this harms viewer investment. Just for funsies, let's compare the fight to TLJ throne room scene. Very briefly. TLJ aims for dramatic, desperate, new allegiances fighting together. It is fast and flashy, which helps hide the many, many major problems. And there's even characterization hidden in there. Rey Palpatine helps Kyle bend several times, but Kyle never tries to fight with Ray-Ban. Even with the disappearing knife, I'm actually leaning towards Rebel Moon being the worst fight. Back to the story. I know you're all hungry for it. Robit sends the slow-mo and runs in after all the fighting is over. Typical. And it's still wearing the flower crown. Which means it really did just skip out of work for the rest of the day. Bill gives Robit the order to kill Cora, and Robit picks up a rifle. This seems like a tense moment. Will Robit follow the order or turn against Bill? We know reality will bend to keep Cora alive, but Rookie is disposable. The stakes still exist. The trick here is that the decision has already been made. The killbots refuse to fight. They will follow more mundane orders, but refused all orders from the military to take up arms. So when Robit picked up the rifle, it had already made its choice. Pretty neat. Bill gets shot in the face. Beautiful. Robots are essentially calculators with motion, meaning that Robit doesn't need to aim down the sights to hit its target, holding the rifle nonchalant-like while calculating the correct angle and making micro-adjustments so he can ventilate Bill without appearing to be a threat. Robit then drops the gun and runs away. Very odd that. It already made up its mind and committed, but now it has to have a little think off screen. Handy excuse if you don't want the holy killbot around for the rest of the movie, and yet another example of this glorious shitbag finding ways to get out of work. It's actually pretty impressive. The whole village shows up at once to see what all the slow-mo is about, and Cora accepts this new audience and executes a wounded trooper. That's Pete, by the way. I know you're all very invested in their stories. While we have this close-up of Pete, notice how his ammo belt is on upside down? It doesn't really matter, but it's kind of funny. Makes me wonder what was going on set. Cora tells the audience, we're going to have to fight. So to theorize on Cora's motivations, she probably wanted to save some time and not give the village a chance to do something stupid. They all seem pretty dead set on trusting the Grape Squad's sense of morality. Maybe they would be dumb enough to think saving Pete would be enough to keep the Navy from liquidating them. That's as charitable as I can be. So we know Cora's been here for a while. She may know the culture and standard responses of the military, but Pete here was a potential source of information. As a grunt, he wouldn't know much, but he'd be privy to general orders, the current vibe of the fleet, and any major news that happened while Cora was away. Putting him down feels short-sighted. We cut to the next morning as Cora's preparing to leave. We're left to assume some things. The granary got cleaned up, the village agreed to fight, and Rookie will help them prepare. The sponsor gives Cora her old pistol, a bedazzled version of the pistols the soldiers were using. Sponsor explains that he found it at the crash site and kept it hidden. Cora replies that she thought it was lost. So, how do you crash a shuttle so hard that your sidearm is considered lost forever, but you don't have so much as a visible scar? I have to assume Cora's head got bonked so hard she's regressed to toddler levels of gullible, which, considering later events, actually makes a degree of sense. Cora's plan is to find General Titus, a war hero turned rebel, and implied to have lost his army during his fight with the Motherworld, but is still alive out there somewhere. Gunner is brought along so they can find the rebels he sold excess grain to, the Blood Axes. Don't laugh. The sponsor tells her, a general and an army, we might stand a chance. A callback to their earlier conversation. If I find warriors to fight for Velt, I give the village hope. And if I give them hope, they will fight and surely lose. Cora doesn't say anything about this, just looks sad and resigned before giving him a goodbye hug. It's small, and I like the way they did this. Cora and Gunner leave the village for Providence, a nearby town with Gunner's contact. We won't see the village again, so what's the state of things? They have 10 weeks until the Dreadnought returns. Their leader is dead, and their logistics guy left with Cora. That leaves leadership to Boy Toy and Sponsor. Rookie will likely be tasked with organizing the defense since he's the only one with any experience in the matter, but he is just a rookie. They have 12 soldiers worth of gear and weapons. 11 considering Bob's rifle was damaged, and it's doubtful there's enough ammo for everyone to train properly. So what happens next? We have to assume that their comms only reach low orbit, where Rookie can do the check-ins. Otherwise, the Dreadnought will come back early to investigate. There's still one soldier unaccounted for that could cause trouble. 13 on the landing site, 11 dead in the granary, plus Rookie. You guys thought I missed it, huh? So let's say in 10 weeks the rebels show up and destroy the Dreadnought. The Motherworld would respond in force. If they stayed, the village would get turned to ash. So no matter how you look at it, they will have to run at some point. Either now while they're nobodies, or after they get revenge, and are on the most wanted list. A quick aside, I assume that Cora's plan was much less convincing rebels to save a village, and much more giving them the date location of when the Dreadnought would be vulnerable and in low orbit. Giving them intel on a major threat's weakness, with a side benefit of good publicity for saving farmers, is a much easier sell than a blaze of glory to save a few dozen Amish. We'll see what the film thinks of that later. On their journey to Providence, they stop for the night and light a fire. Gunner asks her, "So, you were a soldier for the Motherworld?" Alright, what? So, Cora arrived via shuttle crash with her gear, lived there for 2 seasons, and reacted with fear and recognized the Dreadnought as a Motherworld ship. How did they not know this? Assuming Sponsor didn't tell anybody about the gun he found, a big assumption, and against his character since he'd be keeping a secret from the village for the sake of a possibly dangerous stranger. If she kept her Gucci pistol, there would be other goodies in that shuttle, and while it's not in the film, Apparently, her shuttle was the same model as the ones the soldiers came in on. So anyway, it's time for another exposition dump. When Korra was 9 years old, the Mother World invaded her planet, killed her father, and took her away. We see a bunch of brave fighters standing in an empty plaza shooting at an aircraft before it reminds them the importance of cover. The shadowy outline of a tank as it pushes through tight city streets and buildings, and an execution squad complete with the red-robed priests. Priests in an active war zone, less than 50 feet away from where enemy fighters were just shooting at an aircraft. Little Korra took her dead dad's pistol, some sort of Tech-9 looking thing with a massive advantage over the 10mm. It has rear sights. The general is a freak named Belisarius, who later in life would get into politics and name himself regent. But right now, in the flashback, he's approaching young Korra and putting his rifle on the ground. The narration explains that this general likes to lead on the ground because he relishes the ecstasy of combat, which is a shit excuse. He's alone, not leading anything, he's worthless. So the general kneels in front of Child and holds the gun under his chin and pulls the hammer back. It makes revolver ASMR sounds, which is really bizarre. The child pulls the trigger and nothing happens, so the freak picks her up and surprise adopts her. So why did he do that? Was it a moment of clarity and he wanted to end it before he slipped back into madness? Did he think it would be funny to traumatize a child with his final moments? Was there something about the gun that he knew it wouldn't fire was testing her resolve? The Joker did something similar in The Dark Knight with Two-Face. He put a revolver in his hands, cocked the hammer, and let him decide if he was to pull the trigger. But the choice was an illusion, as the Joker kept his finger on the hammer, preventing it from firing. Throughout that movie, the Joker performs pretty complex plots like bank robberies and assassinations, but tries to give off the impression of unpredictability and insanity. This scene is a perfect microcosm. Do I look like the kind of guy with a plan? I bring that up because both these scenes are similar, but the Joker was acting according to his character, and the freak comes off as a cheap recreation by someone that did not understand the original. Little Korra is raised on the freak's warship, going through the horrors of basic education and accompanying the freak when he went on non-combat missions. When she was 18, she became an officer. At this point, the freak was well respected and decorated, a personal friend of the king and the royal family. Alright, just a personal thing? I hate this. The main character being a soldier deserter? Cool, I like that. The main character being the adopted child of the regent, the big bad of the world? Don't like that. We're shown Korra and a rando at graduation kiss before a botched cut and he's dead. Korra's narration explains, "At the Academy Melatorum, they encouraged us to find a lover, someone we would defend with our lives." Interesting concept, strong Sacred Band of Thebes vibes, but it conflicts with the whole "I was taught that love is a weakness" speech she gave to sponsor. Unless she meant life beat it out of her, not anyone specific. That does remove some charge against the Motherworld, though. What has so far been portrayed as incompetent space Nazis gain almost a hint of sympathy since the character that hates them the most has either misled or outright lied to the audience to make them look worse. It calls into question if what she's saying about them is even true. Yeah, it doesn't change anything since they'll beat an old man to death and form goon squads, but the fabrication calls the bigger picture of the government into question and the reliability of Korra as a narrator or witness. Let's put the story to the side for a moment. We got 90 seconds of this flashback in some battle. Lots of slow-mo, lots of other things I want to talk about. First off, the way her arms and hands are oriented tells me this was a CPR attempt. Personal pet peeve, because I see this movies all the time, CPR is not a noodle arm activity. Palms down, interlock fingers, heel the palm on the sternum, elbows locked, arms perpendicular to the ground. The force for each compression is 2 inches. Minimum. 2 inches might not sound like a lot, but when done properly, it's not uncommon to break ribs. CPR is not delicate. It's 2 beats per minute of bone pops. Removing the chest peaks makes sense, but the pauldrons was a waste of time. The killbots. We know they can run, so just walking into enemy fire is not only stupid, it is a wasted opportunity. Let's compare to some possible inspiration in Fallout 4. Lots of robots in that game, especially if you count the DLC DIY abominations. Looking at the base game at least, the robots are built to purpose. Protectrons are cheap and slow, Mr. Handy's multifunctional and mobile, Sentry Bot's heavily armored with sturdy base to distribute the load. But the relevant one to this conversation is the Assaultron. Moderately armored but highly mobile. These buggers are quick. They have a head-mounted laser, but their primary attacks are melee. When most enemies either keep their distance and stick to cover, or run at you with little to no armor, a bipedal steel machine closing the gap with intent to dismember provokes a natural fear response. Fallout 4 is heavily criticized, for good reason, but they make at least a minimal effort to give their designs purpose.
I'm a woman, baby. Can't you tell?
Rebel Moon killbots being used in an assembly line of disposable fodder is such a disappointment. They have speed. Use it. Make them scary. The killbots are also shooting one-handed from the hip, which I praise in the Grainery because in that context it made sense. And if they were running, maybe I'd defend it here. But they're not, so I won't. The shuttles are hovering near the back, where they can provide a level of covering fire without exposing themselves too much. Although it would be nice to see some use from those top-mounted artillery pieces. Let's talk guns. I touched on it earlier, but this flashback shows us a lot more. I really like the sound and visuals of the projectiles. The quick glow, then the laser immediately trailed by a burst of flame and smoke. They whistle and sing in the air, but make deep thuds when they contact or clang when hitting metal. This is not just aesthetics. It tells us the weapons are shooting projectiles as opposed to lasers. Lots of implications here, and even more questions. The 10mm. It's not actually 10mm, it's something like 15. I just call it that because it looks familiar for some reason. It's basically a Glock with extra parts and no rear sight. It appears that the slide doesn't move when fired, either an inconsequential error or a sign of some enclosed warp shenanigans going on in the internals. The blocky bit in front of the trigger could be something about recoil maybe, or maybe a battery. On that underside thing is an underside rail, useful for a flashlight or laser, especially if you're restricted to only a front sight. I am still mad about that. The ammunition itself is interesting. The wiki calls them slag weaponry, and says they shoot superheated metal. Cool idea. What we see in the film confuses things. The visuals are right, the sound when they hit something are right, the visuals of it leaving the muzzle are right, but if it's a solid projectile, that raises questions on the magazine casing in action. We never get a good angle on the magazine to see what's in there, but I assume it's a standard projectile and electrical contacts. More on that in a minute. And to be clear here, this whole bit is more about theorizing than criticism. Nothing inherently wrong with not being able to see the inside of a magazine. Cased or caseless ammunition. In our modern age, caseless ammo is real finicky. The magazines need to be watertight, the process is expensive, the accelerant is fragile, but all that can be hand-waved with future tech. Caseless ammo has heat problems though, and in traditional ammo, the ejected brass absorbs a lot of heat, so for a caseless ammo rifle, they have to be designed to remove that heat, which could be what all that extra oomph is in the rifles in 10mm. The two big advantages to caseless ammo are the weight savings and the elimination of an ejection system. By the way, we know it's caseless ammo because no shells or casings are ejected. We know the action has no ejector, but the 10mm have slides and the rifles have charging handles. Neither of them actually move though. So if we're being generous, we can say the rifles are non-reciprocating, so the handle's only used to fix malfunctions. But the pistol has no excuse. To move around from the magazine to the chamber, something needs to get behind it and push it into place. Usually / always, the slide moves to accommodate this. Digging deeper, molten metal projectiles. I do not believe powder by itself could do this, and the gun's making charging sounds supports this. So we got two options. Caseless ammo where an electric coil melts around, which then sets off the powder and fires it, or a railgun or coil gun that melts around as it accelerates it with magnetism. Either way, you need a battery, and you need to change it frequently, which is why I said the magazine has electric contacts. A battery size to fire a determined amount of rounds being housed in the magazine itself just makes sense. While I prefer the railgun concept, as metals melt, their magnetic strength lessens. so ammo with accelerant is much more likely. Either way, the excess heat from melting metal outweighs any effect cased versus caseless ammo could have, to the point something extreme must be happening under the hood, like a localized force field to direct the heat out of the barrel. But at that point, it's probably worth doing something better with the technology, or just sticking with regular guns. So what does molten slugs give you that bullets won't? Possibly armor penetration. Imagine this. A ball of molten metal with a solid core, half melted, like an ice cube. The liquid hits first, followed by the solid core to crack the material, and the rest of the liquid slams into the cracks. Modern armor-piercing explosives work by directing energy into as small an area as possible. A solid core doesn't work this way, but it's close enough, and it's the only advantage I can think of. Downsides? A molten ball means no rifling, no stabilization, which means all these guns have musket accuracy. The rounds we see are slow, subsonic at least, which reduces our range and stopping power. An advantage of subsonic ammo is the ability to use a silencer. Because there's no crack from the sound breaking the sound barrier, the silencer baffles just slowly expanding gases from the burnt powder, and that can nearly eliminate the sound. A liquid, though, would either destroy the baffles or have gaps for the gases to escape. So no silencers, but they are relatively quiet. TLDR, some interesting ideas in these heaters, but there are some problems. And if your sci-fi blasters could be outdone by modern arms, you need to rethink your strategy. Like maybe variety. Lasers for standard and molten slug for armor, similar to some inspiration franchises. Flashback over. Wide shot as they approach Providence, a wooden town with a wooden square exterior wall. It's a neat aesthetic. It tells us lumber is a plentiful resource and population is slow to grow, otherwise an external wall like that would be too restrictive. A wooden wall wouldn't offer much defense in a world of spaceships and guns, but it keeps the critters out and makes getting in undetected more difficult. It's probably not worth the effort to build a full wall like they did, but it serves a purpose and it does add to the vibe. Once inside the town, they see some orcs beating a baldy. Cora calls them hawkshaws and bounty hunters. Now, I don't know if hawkshaw is a race or a slur. It sounds kind of like a clan name. She also says they work for the Imperium. Okay, stop. I brought it up before, but this is ridiculous. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. A crippled and scattered human empire is brought back together by the master of mankind through his crusades. This empire is called the Imperium of Mankind, or simply, the Imperium. Inspiration draws comparison, but at a certain point, inspiration is too soft a word. 40k bolters look like that because they shoot rocket-propelled projectiles. Slag weapons we can only theorize about. 40k Mechanicus worship the machine god because only those that could repair mechanical systems survived Mars' fall. The red robes were camouflage that became doctrine. The red robe priests just do whatever the Motherworld wants. 40k guardsmen are well-trained and disciplined, holding back horrors and wars of attrition to save cities of billions. The Motherworld soldiers are incompetent sex-crazed lunatics. This film keeps taking surface-level concepts from better stories without knowing why it works or how these concepts interact with each other. I want depth. I want implications. I want to see how these concepts interact and clash with each other. Back to the orcs. They release a spider-bot thing that restrains Baldy and walks him off. Looks neat. We'll talk more on this later. Gunner is upset. Baldy was his rebel contact for the Blood Axes. He says this loudly, in public, 15 feet away from the bounty hunters. Cora asks if there is a way to contact them. Gunner says no, but replies with the planet and king that's sheltering them. Talking about where the rebels are 15 feet from bounty hunters is dumb. Really dumb. Bad Gunner. The rebels giving Gunner this information is so much worse. Loose lip sync ships. If the government wants you dead, you'd better be real selective on what information you share and with who. An organic farmer in some shady town has no need for your sensitive information and can only be a risk. We know the Empire is incompetent, So to keep things fair, so are the rebels. They enter the cantina the orcs just left. Lots of new and interesting aliens, but no band playing jizz music, so it's an obvious downgrade. An orc is still inside handing a bag of coin to some robe dude with a pinky ring. This must be the guy that sold out Baldy as a rebel collaborator. Very mysterious. Our dynamic duo wait for the last orc to leave before going to the bar and ordering drinks. Gunnar pays without asking the price, which makes sense as he's the one that visits his town to make deals. Of course he's familiar with the bar's prices. Gunnar then turns, and with the bartender right behind him, they talk about finding rebels, a wanted general, and a king. OPSEC, Operational Security. How hard is it to keep your mouth shut? Bounty hunters just threw Baldy into a BDSM spider and you're openly discussing this stuff in front of a bartender that welcomes bounty hunters. Right, anyway. They decide on finding General Titties first, then the rebels through King Leviticus, because if they find the rebels first, it could expose them. Assuming they don't just ask Admiral Noble for directions first. They both drink and Gunnar gags. Situational humor that implies he's never drank this stuff before, despite knowing the price. Now, I could just chalk this up as an inconsistency, but I'll be nice and assume this means he buys his customers drinks to get better grain prices while he stays sober. That would fit what we're told about his character, and despite how it sounds, I really do want to give this movie a win if I can. A goblin man touches Gunnar's shoulder, offers a biome from Cora, and Death grips his giblets. Snyder believes in true equality, balance. No one is exempt from his edge. Cora does step in and rather dismissively tells Goblin to leave. He responds poorly, drawing a knife and pressing it to Cora's throat. She responds by disarming Cardi B and throwing him into a table. This is much more believable than the Grainery fight because Weinstein is an untrained oaf and the throw is more of a push anyway. The room responds much like the cantina scene. Momentary silence, then carrying on like nothing happened. The clear inspiration isn't a problem, but again, it invites comparison, and that's not something Rebel Moon can win. Goblin stumbles out, and Cora loudly addresses the whole room, asking if anyone knows where General Titties is. OPSEC. I hate Cora so much right now. A brain bug answers, or more accurately, uses its tentacles wrapped around a man to get him to answer. The octopus flea is pretty neat, not totally out of place in an alien brothel. Buggins knows the general. It even knows he's at the Coliseum planet Pollux. So apparently, the general that fought the Imperium is so unstealthy that an alien prostitute on some backwater planet knows where he is. Now a brain sucker would be the thing to know this, but still. The orc gang just had to bribe the brain bug instead of the pinky man and they'd be set for life. Plot contrivance, moving on. Well, not moving on quite yet. According to Scott Hecker, the supervising sound designer, in a sound effect interview, Snyder stated that the bug is a customer and not an employee, as evidenced by a timer in the human's hand to measure the session. This calls into question how much of a network the bug would really have. One brothel employee has many customers, while a customer may only frequent a fraction of the employees. The question of consent also arises. If a customer is paying a mind control sex worker for sessions, then they are consenting to a mind reading. But if the customer is a mind reader, I suspect the employee would refuse service, i.e. no consent. But to be fair, we don't know what the employee is even comfortable with. We also don't know if the bug is even a mind reader. It may be able to send commands but not read signals. And if it's not, and if it's a customer, what does it do for work? And how does it have this information? It's complex, many questions, no solid answers. Even when I watched this scene for the first time, I assumed the timer was the bug's. It just held it so the customer could track the time. Moving forward, I'm going to be assuming my initial conclusion was correct, but you should be aware of the intended interpretation. Weinstein returns with two friends. Valuable life lesson. You could be a fat goblin rapist, but as long as you have confidence, you can make friends too. Cora tells Gabo to leave. He reveals a third friend at the back door, and the fight begins. I had fun with the Grainery, but I'm not going to play-by-play this one. Picking apart a melee is entertaining. I'll just summarize a Cantina shootout. The 10mm slide moves now, so we can chalk up the earlier scenes as prop whoopsies. Nobody can aim. I'd call this plot armor, but Cora can't aim either until the end of the fight, so it's both plot armor and a way to draw out the scene, I guess. Cora gangster shoots, and misses, typical, and shoots one-handed when it's unnecessary. A wooden table blocks the rounds, which blows my armor-piercing theory out. These sci-fi guns are now completely inferior to modern arms. But at least this means that the armor is probably useful, but that means that everybody should definitely be wearing armor if it can actually save your life. The goblin punches when he has a gun, but to be fair, Cora leg sweeps him instead of shooting him, so they're even. A hooded man with pinky rings shoots Weinstein, and the fight is over. So yeah, not good. Incompetence kills the stakes. Cora's silliness further hurts her character as a skilled soldier, and the table makes the guns even worse. Pinky puts his gun away and walks past Cora. Cora... Well, I don't know enough to fully explain why I despise her pose. Something about her bad posture and aggression just makes my blood boil. I can't explain it. Probably just being unreasonable. Pinky starts looting bodies when Cora calls him out for snitching Baldy to the orcs. He ignores this and explains he doesn't like bounty hunters either. He's not a gun for hire, just an opportunist. When the two go to leave, Pinky runs up to them, says he can fly them to General Titties for whatever cash they have in their pockets. They go with him. Pinky, or Kai, but that sounds too similar to Cora, so I'm sticking with Pinky, is the most suspicious dude in an alien brothel. He works with bounty hunters catching rebels. He's a snitch, an opportunist, and he's helping for a net loss to transport them to rebel leadership. I'd say they should, under no circumstances, travel with this man. But I mean really, what are their options? Say no and leave Pinky with no reason not to snitch on them for a smaller reward? Shoot him and have to find another pilot while evading arrest for killings in a town full of bounty hunters? Their only choice is to take Pinky's offer and either change his mind or betray him before he betrays them. Less than ideal. All of this could have been avoided if they used OPSEC, but that ship has sailed. Pinky's ship is some sort of cargo ship with an air traffic control cockpit. All that glass and the non-aerodynamic shape means speed and combat are not its strong suits, but the 360-degree views and elevation help with precision movements, helpful with maneuvering crowded docks or lining the ship for loading cargo. I like the shuttles, I like the cargo ship. They make sense. As they're taking off, Pinky says he's got to make a stop somewhere first, but there's a capable fighter there the duo might want to recruit. Again, they don't have much of a choice here, but this is super sussy behavior. They'd better be watching him like hawks. Pinky asks Gunner about his work, and halfway through the response cuts him off in a dismissive, wow that's crazy sort of way. Gunner, for his part, is acting how you'd expect a dirt farmer on a spaceship to act. Not overboard though, a restrained nervousness. We cut to the Dreadnought to catch up with our buddy Noble. He's butt naked injecting space hookah, as one does, when his subordinate comes in to inform him of Baldy's capture. So far, I actually kinda like this. The injection sites show us that while he may be human, there are some serious augmentations at play. This is a decent way to set up later events without throwaway lines or yet another drawn-out flashback. It's doubtful that he got his ports installed just for hookah, which also tells us he's not above using expensive equipment to satisfy self-centered urges. At the end of the scene, tentacles start wrapping around him. The wiki describes them as gifted artificial life sex objects, but assures us it's consensual. Moving right along, the cargo ship lands in a spiky desert. Pinky greets the fat like an old friend and hints at a deal if they can talk with his debt slave. So slavery exists in the Outer Worlds. Also griffins. Well, debt slavery anyway. Interesting take on frontier justice. Though the stated 24 seasons sounds excessive and the fat might face his own justice if lawmen come sniffing. They meet Aquaman, chained and working an anvil. He immediately agrees to join them if his debts are paid. The team can't afford the debt, so the Fat offers a bet. If Aquaman can ride the Griffin, he goes free. If he can't ride the Griffin, the whole team becomes slaves. 1. Is Aquaman really worth it? All they know is that he's willing and bad with money. They know nothing of his history or skills. He's some random guy and they need to stop a dreadnought. 2. Why does the Fat think this is a good idea? He knows Pinky, and Cora comes off as an antisocial rebel. They obviously want to go quietly and are more risk than they're worth. Cora asks Aqua if he can do it. He says yes, then goes to do it. So 3. Does no one else get a say? What's Gunner's view on this? He does deals and numbers. Does he have no input? What about Pinky? Okay, honestly, Pinky is probably totally on board with shooting their way out. Gunner should say something, though. The goons drop the ropes at Aqua's request, and the Griffin screams at him. Now, it looks like the ropes aren't tied to anything, so the bird could just fly off, but a magic rope appears in the sand, so I guess the jury's still out on that one. Aquaman gives a beautiful speech to Big Bird about kinship and being betrayed, fear and self-hatred. He calms the bird long enough to mount it. Thing is, that whole speech is in salmon. I had to look at the script to find it. That's not awful. We don't need the dialogue to understand the rest of the story. We don't even need Aquaman for that matter. And speaking a native language is an in-character trait. But this is the most he says in the movie, and it's in salmon. I'm sure all of you have seen the double slow-mo jump shot, but there's also the bit where the bird doesn't fly away from him, but towards him so he can jump back on. And every slam the bird does to get him off is done in just the right way that would hurt the bird more than the writer. So, First Flight in How to Train Your Dragon was a slow build of trust over days, and flying only worked after many failures as they learned to work as a team. In Avatar... Okay. Well, I rewatched the Avatar First Flight scene for comparison. After a mind meld, the bird was scared and confused. It tried to fly but kept fumbling because the two weren't in sync. So what was the moment that they learned cooperation? Mutual trust. The big emotional moment. Sammy aggressively yells, "Shut up and fly straight." Sammy learns control by being aggressive to the vulnerable animal. Rebel Moon's flight scene didn't make me feel angry and uncomfortable, and you know what? I think the Griffin looks cool. Aquaman lands, pets a cute bird, and leaves with the group. The Fat tries to ride the bird and gets killed. So we're done with Desert Planet. The plot didn't move. They just picked up a hobo that might, but won't, be useful. The reason for going there, Pinky's unspoken reason, was never done. They just picked up the guy he mentioned since he had to be there anyway. This is never addressed by any of the characters. The bird killed one guy and presumably flew off before the goons killed it. They are no closer to finding the General Tidius. In fact, as they're leaving, Cora asks if there's anyone else on the way. They are making more pointless detours instead of finding the General. They are up against a dreadnought. What use are 2 more hobo hitchhikers against that? When they do reach the General, and eventually the rebels, time to plan, organize, and position is much more valuable than 2 loners on a ship. At least Gunner should be feeling the time crunch and saying something. Cora, by asking for this detour, is a lost cause in my eyes. Desert Place was a waste of time, and where they're going next is a waste of time. We've reached the halfway point in the film's runtime. It's been rough. I'm proud of you. Let's take a short intermission to go hydrate and use the restroom while I get meta. Now you may have heard this was originally a Star Wars script that got rejected and became its own thing. That is true, from a certain point of view. Apparently, Zack Snyder got the idea in the late 80s for a college assignment to make a one-line pitch, The Dirty Dozen in Space. In 1997, Snyder met Kurt Johnstad and shared his idea of 7 Samurai in Space. It wasn't until 2003 that they started sketching characters and brainstorming scenes. In 2012, there were discussions with Lucasfilms to use a Star Wars IP to make a Star Wars for Grown-Ups movie. With Disney's purchase, the talks died. It stayed as ideas and notes until Snyder called Johnstad during 2020 COVID. Snyder was working on Army of the Dead at the time, and they wrote 100 pages together. They were hitting deadlines, so Snyder's co-writer Shay Caton came in and brought it to a finished 216 pages. That was too long, so it was trimmed to 138 pages. That story was scrapped, and they went back to the 216 pages and cut it in half to make 2 movies with a new ending written for the first half. The actual writing process goes like this. Snyder writes the first and last 5 pages, gives them to Johnston, and they work through the middle together. They split the load by writing scenes separately and discussing the work with each other. Johnston told The Hollywood Reporter, quote, "It's worked for 20 years, so I'm going to keep going with it," end quote. The Rebel Moon script was the first last pages done by Snyder, the first 90 pages the middle done by Snyder and Johnston, then Shay was brought in and they 3-way split the last 116 pages. Then it got cut in half with a new ending written for the first half. Alright, intermission over? Just finished Desert World? Let's go. Next stop is an industrial cobalt mining planet. They land on a pad near the rooftops and ride the elevator down with their next recruit. So I guess she met them on the pad? Easy enough to find that they just called her? Pinky explains what they want from her on the way to her fight scene. Some woman begs for her help, she ignores her and enters the battle arena. Mantis, by the way, an aloof badass, just like Korra, and we don't get any more characterization from her. Also like Korra. And before anybody argues, keep in mind, lore dumps are not characterization. When Mantis enters the arena, Korra slowly reaches for her 10mm. No security checks, everybody has their guns. An industrial world would have plenty of loud sound, so it looks like Korra isn't concerned with gunshots being an issue. And if they can't penetrate wood tables, these metal walls will prevent collateral. I'm saying guns are viable here. Keep that in mind. An unsexy spider holding some kid shows up to chat with Mantis, who's actually named Nemesis, but that's dumb and the screaming woman said Mantis, so I'm sticking to that. Mantis tells the spider she just wants to talk. The spider responds with, "I'm clearly distressed, that's true." Which makes no sense, Mantis didn't say anything like that. Who's the spider talking to? The rest of the conversation makes a little more sense. The mining operations poisoned her and made her sterile, so she's gonna eat poverty children as revenge. It's as dumb as it sounds. Mantis tries to empathize by saying her kids are dead too, but the spider is a brick wall. Being able to talk doesn't make it intelligent. The fight begins. The fight moves in stages. It begins with Mantis using 2 swords against the spider using its 10 legs as blades and holding a spear. Lots of dodging and blocking attacks. The legs and spear can block swords unless a weak point is hit. The biggest problem here is that the spider could overwhelm Mantis with a flurry of attacks if she wanted to, but doesn't. Really, it's not a big deal though. The movement is quick and the spider is looking like a real threat. Mantis cut off one of the legs and the spider recoils in pain, dropping the child. So now the spider, child, and Mantis are separated. Yet our team does nothing. 1. They don't want to interrupt because that would be demeaning to Mantis. A child is involved? No. 2. They don't want to interrupt because this is an interview process. Mantis needs to prove herself. Again, child. No. Mantis jumps back into the fight, both swords blocked by the spear, and stares at the child. Earlier it wasn't a big deal that the spider didn't kill her. Now it is. For 5 seconds straight, the spider just stares at a distracted Mantis. Its legs lay still. It doesn't kill when it has no excuse not to. In the end, it chooses a headbutt instead. Very dumb. The spider slow-mo pounces, and Mantis has to roll and evade. She grabs her sword, her prosthetic arm gets pinned with a shower of sparks, and Mantis slices the limb off. 1. Where she cuts the limb is at a hard part that would normally block the blade. This isn't a problem though, because as anyone that cuts wood knows, when it isn't held against something hard, you're more likely to bounce than cut. 2. The mechanical arm was fully punctured and shooting sparks. I know next to nothing about electronics, but even I know that open sparks means broken. This would be a cool limitation for her to overcome in the fight, but somehow the arm continues working perfectly. The best part of the film happens right here. While Mantis is rolling away from spider strikes, Gunner, the presumably unarmed, nervous farmer, runs forward and pulls the kid away from the spider. No one else steps in to help. Not the plot armor protagonist that earlier reached for her gun. Not the outwardly friendly smuggler. Not the honorable Aquaman. Gunner, the guy that sold to both sides of a civil war, is the hero. Mantis pulls the limb from her prosthetic and keeps fighting until a wide swing knocks her away. With Mantis down, the spider turns on Gunner, who pushes the child away to dodge a couple attacks, then pulls her back behind him when the girl is exposed. The spider didn't use its legs here either, but honestly I didn't even notice. The odds are stacked so high in the spider's favor already, and as far as the spider is concerned, she can take some time to spear the pest without too much effort. While the spider is distracted and rearing up for an actual attack, Mantis stabs it in the ass. The spider recoils in pain and turns on Mantis in a rage. Mantis stands back and ignites the blades. The spider throws the spear and Mantis cuts it in half. Okay, now we're at the part that ruins Mantis. Korra, Pinky, and Aquaman were all ruined by not doing anything to save a child. Mantis is ruined for waiting until now to light the blades. If she lit them earlier, she could have carved through the spear and slay the beast. The only reasons I can think of are to keep the fight going for a challenge, or if the blades have some sort of durability disadvantage when lit. But again, a child is at risk. Not the time. Ruins the character. Which is a shame because until now she was doing well. Good fighting, some cringe dialogue, but busy trying to help people even as she hears out our team. It really is a shame. Anyway, Mantis gets a good hit in when Spider totally misses, gets grabbed, and waits a full 8 seconds before stabbing it. Fight over. Aquaman says good job. Mantis tells him not to celebrate because this could easily be any of you lying here in the gutter of some forgotten world in the name of revenge. Mantis is trying to be deep and get her message across, but unless Gunner starts eating orphans, I'm calling bullshit. Next we cut to the ship. Mantis walks by, I guess she said yes. Korra walks up to Gunner and tells him good job, helping people isn't natural for everyone. Gunner tells Korra it's natural for her, which is a lie. Korra just stood and watched as Gunner almost died saving the child. Gunner references the Grainery and says she didn't hesitate, which is also a lie. But to be fair, to Gunner, he doesn't know this. Korra stays true to her character and makes the conversation all about herself. Time for another flashback. Tales of how amazing Korra is reached the king and she was made bodyguard to the magical princess. Okay, 2 things. 1, I'm hesitant to call this a Mary Sue as everyone's definition is different and she doesn't know how to do everything. Crashes shuttle, so I don't think she can fly, and we haven't seen her doing any swordplay. 2, her daddy is the ruler of the Empire. She was a super famous amazing soldier and bodyguard to the prophesized magical princess before she got chopped. Korra is one of the most specialist people in the whole universe and everyone either likes her or thinks she's cool. This gets more annoying, convenient, and less relatable the more it happens. This trend exists throughout the film, but this reveal was so egregious that I waited until now to mention it. This reveal gets worse though, because after saying the regent got her the bodyguard role, quote, I couldn't have known it was something more. Implying she had an unwitting role in the assassination, so she's even more specialer. The flashback is a snowy forest with a supervillain castle next to it. Korra is watching as the princess plays fetch with her mastiff. Everything here is very non-alien, which hints that this is the capital on Earth. It looks very nice. Glad they sorted out that climate population thing. The dog comes back with a dead bird. Princess holds it, there's a bright aura around her, and the bird comes back to life. At this point you may expect me to criticize this, but no. It was set up earlier, it doesn't break anything, it's fine. Don't like how it needed yet another flashback, but I already said that. The flashback ends and Korra has tears on her face and is sniffing. Amazing. The most emotion we get from her and it's hidden behind a flashback. This thought is interrupted by yet another flashback. The king himself is thanking Korra for being friends with the magic princess. Oh god, I hate this so much. That flashback ends, Cora's still sad about the dead princess, and Gunnar holds her hand. Now, I'm probably being too harsh here, as this is the most emotion we've seen from Cora all movie. Her being comforted by Gunnar makes sense, and Gunnar was previously established as a simp, so the scene should be good. But it feels forced. Gunnar almost died while Cora preferred to watch, but Cora is the one getting emotional. It feels manipulative, sinister, like Cora knows how she should act to keep Gunnar orbiting her. I really don't like it. Cuts to planet, giant coliseum in the background. Did you forget they were going to Gladiator Planet? I don't blame you, I did. Some random woman points them to a hobo, General Titus. I'm not joking. I didn't skip any needed context. The general that led a failed rebellion is just that easy to find. And he's a drunken hobo, so he's worthless. With this annoying trend being so prevalent, what would actually be subversive is the general being threatening. I'm disappointed at what they've done to the character, and I've never even seen him before. They spray him with a garden hose like a dog, he says he's sad, Cora says revenge good, he joins them. Everyone is just silently watching like always, including Mantis, who gave that revenge bad MK speech on the last planet they were on, and she says nothing, of course. These characters are all cardboard cutouts. So now all they have left to do is meet the rebels. They visited 3 planets and gained 2 hobos and a Glasgow kid. Not looking good. Cuts to the Dreadnought. The orcs deliver Baldy to Noble, who looks like a cross between the CIA and a sex offender, wearing a regular white shirt and tie in the space fantasy movie. He then interrogates the Baldy right there, in front of the bounty hunters. Okay. Baldy spills his guts, then things get very stupid. Noble takes a pneumatic gun thing with a spike rod piston and locks it into a mount on the spine of the spider. When that happens, a screen appears to show an X-ray of Baldy's neck with a projected entry path highlighted. Now, I'm no expert, so I asked around. It's possible the neck was chosen in order to paralyze, but then that piston should be clean and smaller. If it is meant to kill, it should be mounted higher up to penetrate the base of the skull. So either way, it's a bit silly. Noble pulls the trigger, then when he unlocks the gun by twisting it to the left, the spider bot releases Baldy's corpse? That means any time you remove the gun, it releases a prisoner. By design. Very, very bad design. Unfortunately, plot critical design. Noble tells his lackey to dissect his brain for more info. 1. Why didn't he ask more questions before spiking him? 2. If dissection is a reliable option, why ask questions at all? The best excuse I can find is maybe reliability and speed? And why wouldn't you have this robo-spider walk him to the dissection room instead of dropping him on the hangar bay floor? Does this mean the rebels should be headshotting all their kills so information can't get gleaned from them? Why don't they have a brain bug on retainer for things like this? Actually, that opens a whole new can of worms, because I just realized I've only ever seen humans in uniform, and I don't know if this was accidental or intentional Imperium Master Race implication. Not enough data. Noble says they're going to visit King Levi. Moving on. Our heroes land on Blue Planet and are greeted by King Levi. Why? Of course, I know for suspense and dread, since we as the audience know Noble is on the way, but I mean, why is the king meeting this band of farmers and hobos in the middle of the night, outside the city? The dialogue makes it even worse. Cora speaks in Fish, no idea how she learned to do that. Anyway, the king starts by thanking Cora for being patient, and the rebels will meet them soon. Cora bows and thanks him. The king of this planet is a glorified secretary, arranging meetups between random visitors and an insurgent group. The moment Cora gets back to the ship, a fleet of rebel ships arrive. Quick! Almost makes the king being an errand boy completely worthless. 2 face paint rebels step out, followed by apparently the entire fleet. Lead male rebel asks Gunnar why he contacted them from an unknown and flagless ship. Okay, so it's established that the rebels are suspicious. Which is good. They should absolutely be suspicious. They are insurgents fighting an empire, and an unknown ship full of strangers, and one dude you sold grain to months ago showed up at your safe haven. Sounds like a trap. So why did they land the entire fleet and step out in the open as a group? If this were a setup, they'd all be jibbed. Gunner explains that they should have some trust because of their last deal. Gunner is overstating things, but I do get why he's saying this. He needs their help. He'll leverage whatever he can to win them over. It doesn't work though. It was just business, the king's feeding them now, and Gunner showing up puts them at risk, so he should leave. So just to highlight, Gunner sold them grain. He was told where they were going. Once they arrived, the king fed them. So not only should the rebels not tell random people where they're going, they probably didn't even need to buy food in the first place, and they absolutely wouldn't need to tell a farmer because they don't need his services once they get there. This whole thing is nonsense because they couldn't find a better way of finding the rebels than Gunner already knowing. But the minor trust aspect, I'll give them that. Cora steps in. There's a dreadnought threatening the farm, so she gathered some hobos to fight it, but with the rebels' help, they could stand a chance. Gunner adds that he can pay them in grain. Poor little guy wasn't listening. The rebels say it's suicide. Impossible. Cora makes an emotional argument. The village sold them food, and because of that, the Imperium is coming down on them. Whether this is true or not doesn't matter. It's a good argument if you're trying to guilt someone. So that whole noble village scene, where he seems to just care about stealing the harvest, Cora telling the rebels it was actually because the farm sold them grain tells me that maybe Cora and I are on the same page about something. Noble's motivation was primarily suspicion. But unfortunately, even Zack Snyder disagrees with both me and Cora. Good emotional argument, but these are rebels. They're already motivated to fight the Imperium, but say this fight is impossible. An emotional argument might help a little bit, but an argument against it being impossible should have a much larger effect. They should be giving them information. Try to sell them on their plan. Problem is, there's no plan. There's a disgraced general and a war hero on board. Neither one so much as mentioned what they're actually going to do. The craziest part is that Snyder and I actually agree on this, but the film doesn't have it. Quote, "The advantage that they would have is, they could set a trap for the Imperium," Snyder says. "A lot of times, if you're fighting in a guerrilla war, you don't know where the bad guys are going to be. But in this case, you know in 9 weeks they're going to be right there, so you could set a pretty insane trap for them." End quote. Vanity Fair. Snyder and I actually agree on this. Why didn't anyone say this in the movie? The guilt trip works though. Rebel Man agrees and chats with his sister. She says their only wins have been tactical. Good point. A dreadnought is a big prize, so maybe it's worth some tactics. He responds by saying, if a farmer found them, so could the dreadnought. Also a good point, though that's really mostly because the rebels suck at OPSEC. Rebel Man states, "I will not allow another world to fall in our name," which will be really funny in about 15 minutes. Rebel Man makes a quick speech to Rebel crowd, volunteers only, and no-balls them. He gets about a dozen. The first banters with him for a bit, so I guess they'll be important later. Rebel Man says goodbye to Rebel Girl and tells her to thank the king and bail. Pinky pats Gunner on the back, Aquaman tells General Titties maybe it's not a suicide mission, and the scene cuts. In space now, traveling with Rebel ships. Neat looking ships too. General Titties is staring at the wall because they don't know what to do with this character. Cora and Pinky have a chat. Pinky thinks the rebels are making a mistake by helping. Cora says guilt is powerful. Pinky calls guilt the underbelly of honor, that he used to have honor, that Cora makes him want to be honorable. 1. Why? They haven't really spoken since Farm World. All Cora did is recruit hobos and watch a spider try to eat a child. 2. Why would Cora believe this? 3. Since they met Pinky, he hasn't actually done anything dishonorable, except for watching a spider try to eat a kid. The most dishonorable things they've seen him do was snitch on Baldy before they met. Either Pinky shouldn't talk about honor, or Cora should be very suspicious. Pinky then says they need to make a detour so he can deliver cargo to an impatient buyer. Doesn't wait for a response, then says he'll set the course and let the buyer know. 1. No, you are traveling with terrorists on your way to fight a mission. No pee breaks that can jeopardize the mission. 2. Rebel Man, the one in charge, is not even asked. 3. Cora doesn't argue or ask questions, she just lets this happen. Scene cut. Noble made it to King Levi, killed some people, started some fires, and is having a chat. He's unhappy that the king helped the rebels. The king responds, "Our civilization has lived and thrived for 10,000 years with honor and charity as its most valued tenets." This government of 10,000 years is probably older than the 1000 generation Imperium, and they thought harboring terrorists was charity? They thought repairing insurgent warships was charity. King Levi was essentially using the facepaint peoples as a proxy army against the Imperium. If you're going to do that, you'd better be prepared to fight an open war. But no, a single dreadnought broke their 10,000 year civilization in a day. Oh yeah, 10,000 years, not seasons. So they do measure in years and just use seasons to confuse me personally. Noble says, "Honor good, but charity bad because our king showed charity to an off-worlder like yourself and was slaughtered for his charity." 1. I much prefer this method of storytelling over flashbacks. A bit of dialogue that fits in context and hints towards a bigger picture that isn't necessary to the plot, but rewards those that are paying attention with deeper insight on the characters or history. 2. I don't like the insights it's hinting at. Cora is an off-worlder that wound up being a royal bodyguard in an unknown plot. Now it's hinting that she wasn't only involved, she was the fall guy for the assassination. Cora really is the center of this universe. Of course, that helps explain why she left and was found in a crash, but it makes it silly that nobody, not even Noble, recognized her. Noble bonks the Fish King and the Dreadnought opens fire on the world. Open fire isn't the proper phrase, exterminatus is closer. Throughout Noble's rant at the king, shuttles could be seen leaving the planet in the background, which is good and further evidence for my argument that the background should not be blurred by default. However, Noble and friends are still planetside when it gets nuked. The ship leaves, with the door open, as the wave of debris reaches them. The cool guys don't look at explosions trope is dying for a good reason. They get a message from the orcs about finding the rebels. Noble is going to meet them while the Dreadnought stays behind to finish classing the planet. Scene cut. Our hobo brigade is on Waterworld visiting a trade depot. An unregistered trade depot, which the film believes is worth clarifying but just makes me giggle because of all the IRS and ATF memes clogging my long-term memory. Anyway, Pinky lands and tells the group which boxes to take and not to look inside. Everyone, including the rebels, does what he says and moves boxes. They are so busy with their blind trust that no one sees Pinky step off and scheme with an orc out in the open. Pinky returns and tells Cora, "I'll be happy to leave this life behind." He did not earn this line. The rebel man himself was unloading boxes. So the hierarchy from bottom to top goes: a king of a 10,000-year-old civilization, facepaint peoples of the IED fandom, and at the very top is an Uber driver sister seducer. The rebel man orders 2 fighters maintain Overwatch, which is smart. I like it when characters do smart things, and I really wish they did more of that. The rebels have to be paranoid to survive, and they're on their way to an important mission, on an unregistered trade depot. So keeping a couple guys to watch your back is a good precaution. Doesn't work out for bullshit reasons, but I will get to that later. Cora sees Pinky's talking to an orc as they send a message. She just stands there and Pinky gives her the get good shrug. Cora whispers to herself that this isn't right. Which is an understatement, late, and really something that should be said loud enough for others to hear. The trap springs with a turret firing on one of the 2 fighters. That's the element of surprise. It's been spent. The orcs should have coordinated to all hit at once. Fortunately for them, all these combat veteran hobos are just standing around waiting for the plot to happen. The second ship, which should have kept some distance from the first, but realistically, I get it. Guard duty's boring, and when things get laid back, it's nice to hang out with a buddy. Anyway, that ship has a 13-second delay before it reacts. It charges straight ahead and gets shot down. Rip Bozo. After that light show, the boxes everyone was carrying open up into BDSM spiders and start grabbing people. Only now, 42 seconds after the first shots, Does someone pull a weapon? Unacceptable. Some of the local goons have already drawn on them. Maybe. My background is out of focus, and I still hate it. With the hero hobos restrained in chastity bots, the nobodies are quickly captured. Pinky passes the time by summarizing everyone's backstories, again, and saying he'll get paid. Then a bit about his own backstory. His planet was killed, so he only works for the winning side. Noble arrives. He summarizes everyone's backstory. Again. Seriously, this is at least the third time we're getting these. At least we learned 2 new useless pieces of information. Aquaman is actually Prince Aquaman, and Mantis assassinated a gaggle of officers. Mantis, the one they called and met on the landing pad, is wanted for multiple homicide. And just like that, the bounty hunters are incompetent too. No one makes it out of this movie clean. Noble is happy all these people will get him a promotion. He does mention he thought he recognized Cora in the village, but for the most wanted person in the universe, that is not enough. Anyone in a uniform, any bounty hunter, anyone that gets a galactic newspaper should be able to recognize her. Pinky alone is not enough. Noble ends his crawling exposition recycling by telling Pinky to paralyze everyone so they can't fight. So there's our in-movie answer. Spike gun paralyzes, not executes. Quick side note, while rambling, Noble gives the priest his hat and jacket to hold. So not a separate but equal religious sect, no separate codes of conduct and internal political strife, butlers in costumes. Cheap copies of the Adeptus Mechanicus with no depth. Pinky. All he has to do now is get his retirement check, is to paralyze the hobos and load them into Noble's ship. He is so close to the end. But instead of doing that, he decides to play mind games. He stands Gunner up, puts the paralyzed gun in his hands, and orders him to spike Cora. Pinky tells him, "You play your cards right, you at least might make it out of this alive." Gun calls him sick. Pink calls him a coward. All you have to do is pull the trigger. You can do it. I know you're in love with her. You can do it. To be as charitable as possible, it looks like Pinky has a soft spot for Gunner. He's trying to keep him alive and imprint his worldview onto him. Pinky lost everything, so he learned to abandon loyalties and just look out for himself. Now he's pushing Gunner to accept he cares for Cora and still hurt her to embrace Pinky's worldview. If this had set up, maybe it could work. But as is, this completely flops. Gunner interacted with Pinky twice. Once when they met and he asked about his work before cutting him off, and again when they met the rebels and he pats him on the back. That's it. This character moment means nothing because nothing was done to make it work. Gunner follows the directions on the neck display to lock the gun in, says sorry, unlocks it to release Cora, and shoots Pinky instead. Gunner only saw the BDSM spiders grab Baldy and now grab his hobo pals. There was no way to know that removing the gun would release the prisoner. The scream just gives a puncture guide too, no twist to unlock. That means Gunner fully expected to get shot after killing Pinky. He was apologizing for taking the coward's way out, proving Pinky right about him while rejecting his worldview. Neat characterization. In no way makes up for the horrid spider design allowing the plot to happen. Cora jumps down and disarms an orc, taking his rifle. The fight begins. Right off the bat, 9 seconds pass between Cora getting free and the first person shooting. Call it plot armor, call it characters being slaves to the plot, whatever you call it, this fight is full of it. Cora sprays some dudes fighting Skinny Pete, but somehow doesn't hit Skinny. Incredible. Mystical, really. Cora then opens up on the soldiers in front, yet somehow only shoots the 2 unarmed priests. God is real, and he hates them. The Nobody rebels are free now and shooting. Cora shoots a fuel pod and rips the bridge in half. Gunner uses the gun to release Mantis. 1. None of the troopers shot the immobilized killers before they could be freed. 2. This is an hour 45 into the movie and the 3rd time a character has directly helped another in combat. First, Cora pushed Gunner. I'm not counting Pinky shooting Goblin because the fight was effectively over and Pinky wasn't active in it. And the second time is when Mantis was stabbing the spider before it could end Gunner. So this is pretty nice to see if favor returned. But it's sad how little interaction there is in the film overall. Also, no, I'm not counting Korra spraying around Skinny either. That was God, not Korra. Mantis jumps on an orc to spoil his aim, grabs her blade from his belt, and stabs him. Interesting tidbit, the blade doesn't go all the way through, but she still twists her body in a way that would avoid it if it did go through. She then cuts free both Aquaman and Rebel Man. Total Mantis win. No issues with any of this. Rebel Man gets out, a trooper next to him is firing full auto from 2 feet away and hitting nothing, so Rebel Man knocks rifle out of his hands. With his own rifle. The rifle he was holding while restrained, that none of the goons took from him. He uses Goon 1 as a shield and blasts Goon 2, then throws Goon 1 off the ledge. Noble, who got thrown to the ground from the explosion, gets up, pauses, then turns and walks away, signaling the turret, all while being in the middle of a kill zone and never getting hit. The turret turns the whole ship it's on to take aim at the fighters the rebels were getting into. It starts blowing them apart. One rebel survives by jumping across the fighters, but for some unknown reason stopped on the last one to shoot the turret, then got blown up. Rip Bozo. We see Gunner using a BDSM bot as cover and use a rifle to shoot someone. That's the first time Gunner touched a gun. Good shot, buddy. Mantis blocks a shot with her blades and cuts down 2 goons. In Star Wars, blocking lasers makes sense because Force? Much less believable here. Aquaman shoots someone, General Titties just generally shooting, and that is all our unique and talented hobos do. Except for Mantis, they are indistinguishable from NPC goons. Disappointing waste of the massive fetch quest plotline. Rebel Man gets big mad, pulls spear-shaped shrapnel out of some corpse, bonks 3 goons, and runs up to the turret. It's an epic moment with shots passing all around him in gratuitous slow-mo. He jumps at the turret, stabs through the glass, and misses. Then the guy shoots him. Not gonna lie, that was the best laugh I had that day. Pretty amazing that scrap metal was able to penetrate the glass of a spacefaring warship. Rebel Man pulls back for a second try, takes another round, and sticks him center of mass. Then dies and bungs the steering joystick. Skinny watched the whole thing and is a little upset. We've only known this character for a short time, and they're even shallower than the rest of the Hobo Brigade, so it's a little hard to care. Especially after laughing at Rebel Man's miss. The actor really did give it their all, though. The ship starts drifting down. Amazing that the gunner had full control of the control surfaces. You'd think either another gunner or even a dedicated pilot could take control and correct. You know, like why modern planes have co-pilots. So the ship is coming down. Korra sees Noble on the other side and runs straight through everyone's fire, somehow not catching a single round, and slid under the falling ship so she was facing Noble after the ship cut the platform in half. The platform loses power and falls, dumping both of them onto a buoy. Noble lands on the platform, paces but doesn't see her. Korra is on the structure and drops next to him. I would have aimed for him, but whatever. So the first stage of this duel is Noble with a club and Korra with hands. Both wide swings and waiting until the opponent is ready before attacking. It ends with Korra getting knocked off and hanging by a rope. Noble hits the rope with his club and breaks it loose, which doesn't make any sense, but whatever. Korra grabs the ledge, loops Noble's leg, which also doesn't make sense, drops him, crawls up, then the second stage begins. Noble with a stick and Korra with a rope. More wide strikes and strange things like Noble refusing to let go of his stuck weapon. Noble's arm gets snapped, leg gets stabbed, then things get real silly. Real wide swings where Korra resembles a beanstalk but swings like the town drunk. Noble gets stabbed, bashed, and falls off the ledge. Fight over. It was long and weird with a few redeeming qualities, but littered with plot armor and selective opponent mental deficiencies. Some miscellaneous bits. Noble has a trooper that's been with him since the beginning. the guy that sliced Farmville's father's wife. He died in the fuel pod explosion. The script calls for the TM-87 battle rifle to fire when the rifles fire. So I guess that's what they're called? Except the script also says King Gaze cranks. But the King's Gaze is the dreadnought and still glassing a planet at the moment. Whatever ship this is, isn't the King's Gaze. So I don't really trust the script. Aquaman and Skinny mourn for a minute. General Titties makes a speech about winning. The first words he spoke since they found him. And Chorus says, "The crews of the Imperium are not known for their bravery. After the death of an admiral, protocol will demand the ship's return." Well, the bravery thing is new and contradicted by the flashbacks. As far as the leaving thing goes, sure, maybe. But unless the Imperium wants to send the message that they're weak, they will return, in force, and crush the cause of their retreat to send the proper message. Aquaman thanks Gunner and says he never trusted Pinky. Funny, he never mentioned that before, or even spoke to Pinky. Scene cut, they land in Providence. Don't know who flew, maybe Skinny? They're still with them after all. All their friends are dead, so why not, I guess. Scene cut, they're on space horses returning to the farm. The Imperium landed shuttles at the farm, so there's no reason for a gaggle of hobos not to. The only reason they had to travel to town in the first place was information, and they didn't already have a ship. They only came to town with 2 horses, so that means they had to purchase 4 more to hike back. They should have just landed at the farm. General Titties asks Cora if she really is the assassin. Cora tells him Pinky is a liar. General tells her not to call him General and drinks from a flask. Gunner is carrying a rifle now. Looks good on him. Changes to a distance shot and Robit enters the frame with a spear and antlers. Maybe he took the role of protector? Maybe he took the aesthetics of nature because that's how he thinks of the princess? I don't know. He showed up for a few seconds and now he's gone. No explanation. Scene cut, Waterworld. The Dreadnought finished glassing the planet and now it's here as planned. A shuttle finds Noble's body on a rock. Specialist medical monks with robotic voices that totally aren't tech priests stick him with tubes and start a machine. As they state, they are not stabilizing him. They are putting him in a VR chat room with the Regent. Why they can't stabilize him at the same time is a fun quirk for aesthetics that's totally worth risking an admiral's life. The drip's superior to vital functions, after all. Taser, taser, taser. Noble wakes up in dreamland on a frozen lake with the Regent. He approaches the Regent. Staff slam. Causes cracks and bright lights. Noble tells him he found Cora. She was with the General Titus and Rebel Man. They are close to capture. Regent is not pleased. His daughter joining a growing rebellion, fighting with the, well, he said genius, General Titus. Noble says they're close. Staff slam. A beast stalks below the ice. Regent commands him to break the rebels and capture Cora alive so she could be made example of. And if he fails, he will take her place. Staff slam. Ice breaks. Noble falls through. Getting kicked from the call physically dropped him from the science bubble. The tech priests say there's no heartbeat or brain activity. Probably should have prioritized keeping him alive over calling his boss. Hard to follow orders when they're dead. The tech priests, which I now suspect are not licensed doctors, decide to just give him full power. They shock his childhood memories out of him and he's alive again. Strong ending dialogue. Loses some points for gassing up some incompetent characters, and loses some more points for being followed by a weird medical scene. But hey, it's over. It's finally over. We went through the nitty-gritty. Let's take a step back, split it into categories. Characters. Starting with Cora, a strong, stoic character with a tragic past. She confides in her sponsor and Gunner, explaining her history in flashbacks. She will help her friends, sometimes, but at other times nearly kills allies without a second thought, or just do nothing when they need her help. She's very quick to trust, a very strange trait for someone that was framed and hunted. Cora's just a bland character that does whatever the plot needs her to. Gunner, the fish out of water, a nervous, weak, accountant-like character. His role is to beg with grain and be worried. On a mining world, he shows his instincts are to help people despite any personal risk. Gunner is a mostly alright character that could have been something good. Pinky, a strong and not stoic character that will lie, cheat, and steal, loyal to no one but himself, with a tragic past. He's independent and has plenty of connections. There was an attempt to have a character moment with Gunner, but the only person he really ever talks to is Cora. Aquaman, a strong and stoic-ish character with a tragic past. He gets some one-liners here and there, but doesn't have any meaningful dialogue after his introduction. He's a beast tamer of sorts and a strong guy, but in his one fight scene, he's just using a gun like everyone else. Mantis, a strong and stoic character with a tragic past. And swords. She's the only character shown going out of her way to help someone she doesn't know personally, but loses that characterization when she drags out the rescue of a child by not igniting her blades sooner. Her character could have been something, but they don't do anything with it. General Titties, a washed-up drunk who went to an island to die. This character is a living embodiment to the word disappointing. We're told he's a genius tactician. He's one of two that they seek out to stop a dreadnought. But when they find him, he's a drunk loser, doesn't do anything tactical, and after collection doesn't even speak until after the final fight. The characters are all incredibly shallow and underutilized. With the new three, there's almost no character-to-character interaction. With the exception of Mantis, all their fighting styles are the same. They don't argue or disagree. When they do have the rare line of dialogue, it's worthless, and it makes the collection process feel like a total waste of time. I suspect that the segmented writing process was a contributing factor. It's hard to make a natural and building character growth story when it's a split-up team project, much less with 6 characters to write for. Of course, that's just a suspicion. It's possible that even in ideal conditions, the writers would make shit characters. The pacing is bad. Real bad. When we aren't in varied quality of action scenes, atmospheric shots, or those fucking flashbacks, we're in sedated and somber dialogue that typically doesn't need to be said, goes on for way longer than it needs to, repeats itself, or brings up problems. The fetch quest for new characters makes this worse as it just feels like padding. You could cut all 3 fetch quests and nothing would change. The world building, well, it's not horrible. There are some little goofs like gun mechanics and brain bug utilization. The bigger issue is in some of the portrayals, flat, surface level only. The major problems, like everyone being crayon eaters, I chalk up as character problems, not world building problems. Oh, and if you choose to believe the film and Snyder himself, then a dreadnought needing food from the Viking hippies is a big strike. But yeah, there are some strong bones to work with here. This movie hurt to watch. A low fantasy, high sci-fi, gritty space movie lubes my bearings. The planet hopping, 40k mimicry, and custom vehicles and weapons is broth on the beef. So when I watched it and everything started falling apart, it felt like someone spit in my food. So just for funsies, and because I really need a palate cleanser after all this, let's play make-believe. It was a dark and stormy night. Snyder was far from home. His GPS was stuck on Norwegian and his car ran out of gas. The locals were engaging in harmless gunplay with their switches and it made him nervous. So he left the safety of his car and took shelter in my abode. He was impressed with my Pokemon collection and hired me on as a writer for his upcoming film, Rebel Moon. So here's the guidelines. The script is written, but filming hasn't started yet. I'm there to look things over, make changes and recommendations before they start filming. I have to use all the locations, characters, and they have to be just as alive in my ending as the original. I'll keep as many of the cool scenes as I can, even if I think getting rid of them is a better plan, because I don't think I could convince Snyder otherwise. Keep the intro as is. First change, Gunner isn't a cuck. Ask what she's doing so late, invite her to the longhouse, but that's it. When sponsor says, which one, the animal, long pause as their oogling boy toy, or the hunter, cut it to just, which one, and they look at him, no follow-up. Instead of yelling about the thrusting of hips, and sounds of pleasure, be more sedated. Something closer to the gods require closeness for two to become one. Just a hint of subtlety. After the party, when sponsor pushes Core to make Boy Toy permanent, have Core blow him off. It's too early for an exposition dump. Leave some mystery for later. After the much shorter sponsor conversation, the screen goes black and we get a 10-second dream sequence version of the flashback where she kisses a guy and he's dead. No narration, her eyes open, red, then shut again, and it fades to the next scene. After the dreadnought appears and Cora bongs a gong, instead of cutting to the argument in the longhouse, show a couple shuttles leaving as pinpricks and everyone walks down to greet them nervously. Gunnar asks what they're doing here and Father says something along the lines of, "You'd better pray they're not here because of you." Gunnar slinks back. Noble's questioning isn't about needing food, but lamenting their preserved food and wanting something fresh for his officers' morale. The Father says they have no food to spare. There's some back and forth. Noble pulls in Gunnar, but instead of saying they have more than they can store, he says they might have some to spare. Noble shifts to monologuing. The rebels are well fed and armed. Somebody's supplying them. Someone misguided. Small, independent groups who rely on not drawing attention. Something like a farm on a forgettable moon. Who did you sell your grain to? Someone else can clean up the dialogue, but you get the gist of it. Noble begins walking towards Gunnar. The Father pleads that Gunnar is just a worker and couldn't do anything that stupid without him knowing about it. Noble stops and turns back to the Father. He asks if everything goes through him. The Father says he's the sole leader of the village, then Noble kills him. Boy Toy holds back the Father's wife so she doesn't get killed in this scene. When Gunnar asks what he wants after the 12,000 bushel demand, Noble tells him this is the village's opportunity to redeem themselves, to prove their loyalty and dedication to the Motherworld. The shooting the killbot scene? Get rid of it. Bob and Bill don't even mention the robot. Bill instead trips Rookie and he drops his crate. It breaks open and spills cuts into the mud. Bill yells at Rookie and sends Robot to clean the gear while Rookie carries Robot's crates. Let Robot make his speech to Farm Girl. It's a little strange for a robot to do, but we want Anthony Hopkins' voice in this movie. Just include a line that they can't fight anymore. A few extra soothing words from Anthony, and it replaces that stupid Bill explanation and demonstration. The argument in the Longhouse plays out about the same, but Boy Toy is more aggressive in laying the blame on Gunnar and tells him to leave before giving his idea of doing whatever Noble wanted, with the widow he saved standing right next to him. When the soldiers drag Farm Girl into the barn, 3 of them walk out across the bridge with smokes. They'll run back in halfway through the fight. The fight itself, I'm just gonna leave notes that she uses skill to win and not strength. I hope somebody reads them. After the fight, when the village shows up, Farm Girl runs to the widow for comfort. The morning after, when Cora asks Gunnar to join her, Cora calls for Gunnar. He walks up silently and disheveled, didn't get any sleep. Cora says she's never been to Providence and needs a guide. Gunnar looks to Boy Toy. Boy Toy tells him to go, then the scene continues as normal. When Cora and Gunnar are camping for the night, Gunnar confides in Cora. That's his fault the Father is dead. He was just trying to do right by the village by getting the best deal he could. He never told Father. It should have been him. Cora tells him that the Father knew but never said anything because he approved and trusted his judgment. The blame doesn't rest on Gunnar. Cora then tells Gunnar the plan. They are going to use his contact to find the rebels and General Titties. With the General leading the rebel fighters, they have a chance to take on the Dreadnought. Their leverage is knowing when and where the ship will be in low orbit. The loss of a Dreadnought will have the Imperium respond in force, so he has to be prepared to convince them to run. They go to sleep. Cora gets 10 seconds of flashback fight scenes of leading troops. When they see the contact get captured by orcs, Gunnar doesn't know where the rebels are. They go inside to learn more, where the contact's client list is. When they walk into the bar, an orc is waiting. Cora avoids his eyes so doesn't see the coin exchange with Pinky. When Gunnar orders drinks, he tells the bartender that his contact swindled him before he got caught, and slides a few more coins his way before saying he needs to find his stash to hunt down his property. Then he's interrupted by the goblin. After the goblin runs off, Gunnar picks up his dropped coin purse and passes a few more to the bartender, who points him at the brain bug. The bug tells him swindlers are bad for business and bad for the guild. The contact has a stash house on Mining Planet under the name Club Shoutout. Core asks about general titties. The bug says that's a dangerous question, but others that ask disappear into blank sector. Then Goblin returns and they fight. Pinky still shoots Goblin and loots bodies, but he calls himself an entrepreneur, not an opportunist. Says that after that event they'll need a ride out of there, one that he can provide, if they help him with a quick job first. Core says they need to reach Mining World, then blank sector. Pinky says no problem. Gunnar asks what the job is. Pinky says he just needs some backup when he makes a deal. Easy day. Then turns to walk to his ship, and the scene cuts. On the ship, after cutting off Gunnar by telling him to hold on, Pinky starts to accelerate the ship and half shouts, "So you're a numbers guy." Gunnar stutters out a "yeah" response. The Noble tentacle scene. Weird take, but the only thing I want to change is Noble's tone. When he's talking to the subordinate, he's straight-faced with neutral tone. Just cracks a smile when the tentacles touch him. After landing on Desert World, Pinky asks Gunnar if he's ever shot a gun before while shoving a pistol into his waistband and covering it with his shirt. Cora tells him to squeeze the trigger, don't jerk, and expect recoil. Pinky tells him not to shoot himself in the foot. The meeting goes on as normal, but after Aquaman says he's guilty, Pinky speaks instead of Gunnar. Asks if he's a Decimus. Aquaman confirms. Pinky tells him his house is looking for him. Pinky asks the Fat how much he owes. The gambling conversation happens. Gunnar starts to protest, but Cora puts a hand on his chest to tell him to stop. Then goes to ask Aquaman if he could do it. The Griffin scene plays out as normal. When they're walking back to the ship, with the Fat getting eaten in the background, Cora asks Pinky, "So you're returning a known criminal to their trader's house?" Pinky responds, "So the farm with Motherworld problems needs to find a rebel merchant for some missing grain?" On the elevator ride down Mining World, Cora's tapping at a tablet on the wall with Gunnar following along behind her. Cora says the name is tied to a house on sublevel 4, Sector 20. Gunnar says there's a warning and pokes the screen, then says the sector's condemned. Scene cut, they walk into a crowd near an open door. Someone tells them not to go in, it's dangerous. Gunnar asks what's going on. They say a child was taken. Mantis went in to find her. Aquaman says they can help and leads the way. The inside is dimly lit by emergency lights and has rock and metal rubble. Aquaman is leading the way with Gunnar just behind, squinting at a hand-drawn map. Mantis grabs Gunnar from the shadows and holds a blade to him. Pinky says they aren't here for her. Cora pleads that Gunnar is just a farmer. Aquaman says they can help her find the child. Gunnar slowly raises the sketch map so Mantis can see and says they're looking for a house and they can help each other. They walk together to the house. The door is blocked by a large piece of debris. Aquaman moves it and opens the door to the stash house. Cora, Aquaman, and Pinky walk in. Gunnar starts to ask Mantis why she's staying outside when the debris comes down and blocks the door. Then the spider comes down from the ceiling and has a chat with Mantis. The chat goes about the same, but Mantis ends with saying the miners don't have any more of a choice than the spider does. The spider says she doesn't care, they're all to blame. During the fight, Aquaman and Cora try to clean the debris while Pinky searches for a manifest. The kid gets dropped and Gunnar runs in to save her, then guides her through a gap in the rubble. After the spider pins Mantis's arm and gets sliced, she sees the child escaping and changes targets. Gunnar starts to run but sees the kid won't make it in time, so steps in front of her, pulls the gun, shoots, misses, drops it for recoil, and dodges to attacks. Mantis lights the blades and attacks. Inside the room, Cora sees movement and draws on it. The kid looks up and it flashes to an image of the princess. Cora lowers her gun and Aquaman pulls the kid the rest of the way. The fight plays out as normal, but no speech at the end. Cuts to the crowd staring at the open door with a growing sound approaching. Into view comes the kid sitting on a crate, on a dolly, getting pushed by Pinky, with all the others just behind. The kid runs off to her mom. Mantis tells Gunnar that odds are the village will not survive if they stay, but she will fight with them. Aquaman helps get the dolly over the doorframe bottom and asks if the crates were vital. Gunner shrugs and says it can't hurt. Pinky smirks, then Aquaman does. In the ship, Cora and Pinky are looking over screens in the manifesto. In the background, Aquaman pulls a rifle out of a crate and offers it to Mantis, who rejects it with a gesture, and he passes it to Gunner and shows him how to shoulder it. Cora points at a screen and says, "Here, multiple trips to Pollux," and it's in the blank region. Pinky hits some buttons and tells Cora to take a break. He'll keep looking for the blood axes. Cora walks off. Gunner sees this and puts down the rifle to follow her. Gunner asks what's wrong. Cora says nothing. Gunner asks again. Cora starts to say the child, but stops. Sits down and gives her flashback. It's cut shorter though. Starts at "for my loyalty and service" and ends with "special." So just the snowy princess scene. By the end, Cora's teared up and says she failed to protect the Imperium's greatest hope. She has a little cry about it. Gunner holds her hand. She composes and says she won't fail the village. On Gladiator Planet, when the woman mockingly introduces the great General Titties, she gestures to a door. Inside are a few gladiators training. A child in training gear runs up and asks if they're here for the general. They confirm. The kid says to follow and leads them through rooms of training gladiators and equipment. The kid stops in a 2-story plaza, says he'll meet them shortly and goes back the way he came, shutting the door behind him. Gladiators on the second floor draw rifles on them. A group with shields and pistols enters the first floor. General Titties appears on the second level and asks what they're doing here. As the conversation happens, a guy with a cart computer scans each of their faces. Cora says the Motherworld is threatening their village. The general says that's not uncommon. What makes this village special? Cora says nothing. It is a forgettable farm full of good people that has drawn the attention of a dreadnought. Gunner adds, a dreadnought that will return to low orbit at a known date and place. The guy with the scanner finishes and calls to the general. They both leave the courtyard. There's an awkward moment as the team and gladiators are staring at each other. Aquaman tells one he likes his shield. He says he does too. Then the general walks into the plaza to meet the team and tells his men to stand down. The general says the Motherworld wouldn't risk such bounties for a disgraced general. He says the reports of a dreadnought in the region have stirred up old fears, then asks how much time they have, who's leading it, and what the terrain is like. Cora answers, General pauses and says he doesn't have the ships to fight. Gunner asks if he could do it with the blood axes. Pinky says they found them. The general tells the gladiator to gather the troops. Spread the word that second wind initiates when the dreadnought dies. Coordinating with the blood axes requires a face-to-face. The noble interrogation goes the same, except a couple red robes bring a medical gurney with them. After the gun is used to paralyze, it doesn't release the body until a switch is flipped on the base of the spider. When Noble tells them to dissect the brain, the two priests remove the neck gun, the body slumps, and they start loading it onto the cart. Noble drops a nice guy voice once the prisoner is paralyzed. On Dark Planet, Cora and General meet the king. He welcomes them both by full imperial name and say their ship will be refueled but they cannot stay. Housing the blood axes is risky enough as it is. The rebel conversation goes about the same, but Gunner doesn't offer them grain. After Rebel Girl says, "That's suicide," the general steps up and says it's dangerous, but not impossible. They have the element of surprise and knowledge of when it will be most vulnerable. With their ships, he can break the dreadnought before it escapes atmosphere. Then Cora makes a shorter version of the emotional argument, and the rest plays out as normal. In space, Pinky's conversation is much less about becoming honorable and much more about his desire to fight openly instead of behind the scenes. Instead of the excuse of dropping off cargo, Pinky hits a button and an engine goes out in smoke. He says it's an easy fix, but they need to land. Cora calls the lead ship and tells them. Rebel Man and General are on screen looking at papers on a table. The Noble kills King scene is unchanged. On the dock, Pinky asks them to move the marked crates off to reduce weight as to not overwork the engines again. He'll talk to the dockmaster to try to get some cash and parts for the marked crates. The Pinky capture conversation goes about the same but without repeating backstories. When Noble shows up, he gives much shorter acknowledgments of everyone. Commander Bloodaxe, Prince Aquaman, General Titties, the Assassin Mantis. The rest of his speech goes about the same, except he mentions that while Cora is the real prize, using her to find the bomber will solidify his promotion. Pinky making Gunner paralyze Cora plays out the same, but when the gun is locked in, the screen has an eject release switch marked and its status. Gunner kicks the switch cover and steps on it while pulling the gun out of the spider. Pinky fights Gunner for the neck gun, but Gunner uses his other hand to shoot him with the pistol Pinky gave him. In the fight, General is giving orders and a couple nameless gladiators are with the nameless rebels. Aquaman is pushing a crate as cover with Gunner behind him using a rifle. Mantis is doing Mantis things, she doesn't need any change. General gives Morning Rebel the sympathetic talk about battlefield losses instead of Aquaman. Gunner shuts dead Pinky's eyes. Aquaman tells him his quick thinking saved them all. Gunner says he's never killed anyone before, and he thought Pinky was a friend. Aquaman puts a hand on his shoulder and says he's a good man. No matter what Pinky did, Gunner is justified in mourning. Take solace in the lives you saved. Aquaman walks away. Gunner pauses a moment and loots Pinky's pockets. Everyone groups up and Cora gives her "what now" dialogue. On the planet, they land at the edge of the field and walk through it. General doesn't get his "was Pinky lying" dialogue, but everything else stays the same. When the tech priests get noble, they plug in some tubes and say he's stabilized. They ask if they should start reconstruction, but not yet, the Regent is waiting. The Regent meeting goes as is. At the end, when Noble breaks through the ice, it cuts to credits. I may have changed General Titty's character a little too much, but I'll own that bias. A genius tactician devolving into a drunken loser is lame and close enough to a contradiction for me to justify changing it. My big priorities were to cut down on the contrivances, trim repeated dialogue to help the pacing, and give the characters a little more depth. I want to empathize that I am not a writer. I'm a nobody that likes to put myself into the world or the shoes of the characters. An actual writer could do what I did, but much better. Everything I've seen about behind the scenes indicates Snyder is a joy to work with. Aquaman's actor was gifted a necklace and asked if he could wear it during the shoot. It got written into the world and the character's iconography. The visual effects supervisor recommended using a helicopter to get realistic dirt spray from the shuttles, and that's what happened. I also believe, despite the obvious rips, that they really do care. Cora's actress had her trailer walls covered in character lore stuff. Snyder and Kurt have been thinking on this for 2 decades, and Snyder even had wheat growing in his garden at home, so he knew the best time to come back to film the village return scene. It really looks like Snyder is open to ideas on set to improve the visuals and flesh out the local world. This is good, but with his writing process that isn't an option. The thing is, Snyder does work with other writers to build an extended universe, in this case a comic, with a lot of creative freedom. Snyder really needs to replicate the conditions that on set improve the visuals and world building into the script writing process. Let more people see the script, get a writer to look it over before filming like I sorta did. Here's the point. The point of the whole video. Rebel Moon was awful, but it could have been good.